2019. We have 4 presentations this evening and 1 staff report. We will begin with the Independence Commerce Center presentation. Mr. City Manager.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and gathered guests. My name is Zach Walker. I'm the city manager for the City of Independence. A couple of weeks ago, the Planning Commission here in this chambers heard a application for a rezoning of what is known as the Independence Commerce Center project. Number of questions, very lengthy meeting. Since that time, there's been quite a bit of feedback. I know members of this council have gotten quite a number of correspondence from members of the community, folks outside of the community. This has certainly been a project that's generated a tremendous amount of interest. So tonight we really wanted to take an opportunity to slow this down, to hit the pause button, to really provide some feedback to the council and to the community about how did we get here. This is not a project that popped up like a morel mushroom in April. This is one that's been about 2 decades in the making. We really want to use this opportunity to talk about why now, to talk about how this fits in our overall vision for the city, to talk about why this part of town. But more than that, too, we want to listen. So we have an opportunity tonight to provide some feedback to this council, but we also want to gather additional input and feedback that you have so that we can continue to try to arrive at a product that may be acceptable for all parties involved and be successful for Independence overall. So tonight, with that, I am going to give you a little bit of an overview of our Independence for All strategic plan and how this project fits within that. Our Community Development Director, Tom Scannell, is going to talk to you both about the history of this project. We'll truncate 2 decades into a couple of slides. Tom's also going to talk about the zoning that currently exists at the site and how that fits into the overall comprehensive development plan. Brian Kidney, who's our Director of Finance and Administration, will provide an overview of the financial impact of this project. As you are aware, the council contemplated and approved financial incentives for this project some time ago, but Brian will revisit that and also talk about the economic impact that we forecast this project to have. Tom Lesnick, who serves as president of both the Economic Development Corporation and the Chamber of Commerce, will talk to you about site selection, again, about why we're contemplating this area of town. We'll also talk about the impact on our local jobs market. And then Grant Harrison, who is with Van Trust, has some revised project schematics. So from the feedback that was received by the Planning Commission and members of the public who spoke at that public hearing, Van Trust has gone back and modified the project, and they have some feedback for you about what that looks like now, and we'll hopefully get some additional feedback to continue to move this forward. But this is not to be considered a pitch or a play to gather support one way or another. This is really to provide the council and the community a holistic look at where we're at, because we believe that decisions are best made when everybody has a chance to provide that input and work towards a product that will be acceptable to all parties. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Independence for All. From where I sit every Monday night, I have a chance to look at it over there on the wall, but it's more than just a poster on the wall. It is a living, breathing document that guides what we do each and every day. 4 core goals, 74 strategies. Have a chance to speak on that often. It's something we're quite proud of, something that guides our everyday efforts as city staff and certainly the items that we bring to you as a council. Independence for All was not just brought down like the tablets from Mount Sinai. That was a product that was really comprehensive in nature. We utilized our citizen satisfaction survey from several years in a comprehensive fashion to really get a longitudinal look at what the community was telling us about issues of development and economic growth, about public safety, and about our city finances, and a whole host of other topics. We talked to the civic community, we talked to key leaders from great institutions like the school district and the chamber and other entities, and that product led to Independence for All, a plan that was unanimously adopted by our council in February of 2017. The vision statement, which really serves as the foundation of that, reads, "Our quality neighborhoods, 21st century jobs, growing economy, safe, family-friendly community, and cultural diversity makes Independence, Missouri a nationally recognized city with a unique history and sense of place. I have gone in and added the emphasis in the red underline. The product that we're talking about with this, as with any project, must satisfy all aspects of this vision statement. And you can see where neighborhoods need to be considered, jobs, 21st century jobs, economy needs to be considered, and all of that making Independence a city that is nationally recognized. As you're going to hear primarily from Tom Lesnick later tonight, Independence has missed out on these types of projects in the past. This is an opportunity to turn the tide on that, but we know that it's got to check all the boxes of our vision statement in order to be acceptable to us and to our residents in this community. So we flow down from that vision statement. One of the core goals of Independence for All is growth. We have an objective associated with that to attract and retain quality employers. For many years, a very successful strategy in the city was to attract retail development. That's why we are still probably one of 2 indoor malls left in the area. So I've got the 39th Street corridor. This worked very well for us until Blue Springs and Lee Summit had an aha moment and decided maybe we should keep our own residents shopping in our cities and built their own retail sales hubs, and until Al Gore invented the internet and everybody started shopping online. That has really been a blow in the side of our ship and has made it difficult for us to continue to grow quality employers. So we see that shift now more towards the light industrial, the manufacturing, the business park, the office. So as part of that, one of our strategies was to update our Independence Comprehensive Development Plan. That was a plan that had been last adopted in the 1990s, the early 1990s. That was a project that had followed the strategy of the strategic plan to use community engagement. In fact, that plan won a national award for its community engagement. It was a plan that was unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission and eventually adopted by the council. It talked about how we identify neighborhoods, how we identify economic development needs. All the things we're talking about here were contemplated as part of Imagine Independence, which is our comprehensive development plan. Also in the growth category, some of the other strategies associated with that, specifically support development of an industrial or office business park. That was specifically called out. A big reason that was called out again are the types of jobs, the changing economy, but also there is as you'll see in just a minute, a financial component to this. If you were to go to our neighboring publicly owned utility, the Board of Public Utilities in Kansas City, Kansas and Wyandotte County, they have a portfolio of energy customers that roughly has about 30% of that made up by light industrial manufacturing type uses. In Independence, that number is closer to 2%. Those numbers were originally quoted to me by our former director, Leon Daggett, and these may have changed a little bit, but that highlights the disparity and what that does to our rate case. Furthermore, we talked about creating an economic development policy to guide how we hand out incentives. Again, that was a tremendous amount of public input by the taxing jurisdictions, particularly the school districts, the county, and the library, and one that was unanimously adopted by this council. And then finally, in growth, we talk about empowering the EDC to recruit and retain businesses. But as I mentioned, another core goal with our strategic plan is financial sustainability. And specifically, we talk about optimizing resources and identifying and capturing sustainable funding sources. And it wouldn't be a trip to the podium for me if I didn't harp on our city finances. And I do so because it's critically important to what we do day in and day out in our ability to provide basic services to the 120,000 people who call Independence home. This is a chart of our 5-year revenue versus expenditure history here in Independence, specifically for our general fund. The general fund, of course, being our most diverse funding source that we use to provide basic services. As you can see, expenditures have been ever increasing to the point that in the last year, expenditures exceeded revenues to the tune of $1.4 million. This council has adopted a fund balance policy of 16%. We'd grown that exponentially up to 9%, but this last year that dipped down to 7% as we had to draw down given that expenditures outpaced revenues. This is part of the changing economy. This is part of a lot of the work we have done with our own city finances of a very, very rigorous eye towards what are the basic services we should provide, how do we deliver these in the most creative, innovative, efficient manner. We've also made some very tough decisions and partnered with our key partners on employee benefits and other things that of that nature. But as you can see, this cannot just continue to be a cut story. We need a revenue growth story, and that's why attracting this kind of development has been a key strategy of ours. I show this to you, and this has not been certainly audited or anything of that nature, but this is a illustrative look that, generally speaking, if we were not to modify anything in the narrative on expenditures or revenues, which will not be the case, you can see the ongoing trend line, expenditures continuing to increase, revenues remaining relatively flat. We, as I said, have made many, many necessary but tough decisions on our expenditures. It's getting harder and harder to do that. As I've said, it's getting harder to pull rabbits out of the proverbial hat, and that's why we're focusing on how to infuse new revenue into the city's budget. So with that, I'm going to ask our Director of Community Development, Tom Scannell, to come up and carry forward our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. In the late 90s, the city saw a need to develop an area plan that coordinates growth and achieves an optimal balance of different land uses. That plan was the Little Blue Valley Comp Plan. This is an area that covers 24 Highway on the north, the east city limits on the east, 39th Street and Pink Hill Road on the south, and Jackson Drive on the west. As I mentioned, that plan was approved in May of 1999, but the project began many months before that. In fact, it began in February of 1998 and included a significant community involvement over a 12-month time frame. It also created the Little Blue Valley Steering Committee, the Little Blue Valley Citizen Advisory Committee, and the Little Blue Valley Technical Advisory Committee. Each one of these committees were made up of citizens and residents of Independence. They were formed to assist in generating ideas, generating that vision and goals for this plan, reviewing those goals and plans, as well as providing guidance and direction on how the plan came to be. This plan called for growth in residential, commercial, and industrial uses in the Little Blue Valley. As I mentioned before, there was significant community participation. Those were through numerous public workshops with property owners, residents, elected and appointed officials, and everybody else who wanted to participate. And as you can see, several themes were developed out of that public engagement. It wanted the city and the Little Blue Valley to compete for a business and industrial park. It wanted us to compete for high quality, high tax generating projects. And it wanted to position the Little Blue Valley for business and industrial development. This plan built on those themes heard from that public participation and included an economic development goal to attract high-quality new businesses and high-technology industries with commercial activity to broaden the city's property and sales tax base. As part of the plan, the city hired an outside consultant to perform a market study. That study showed demand for 2 million square feet of industrial space in the Little Blue Valley. Kind of fast forward over the next 20 years or so, since the adoption of the plan, the city has seen major commercial developments come forth from Hartman Heritage, Eastland, development along 39th Street, the Trinity development, as well as Center Point Hospital. The city also saw several residential developments take place in the Little Blue Valley. One thing that the city did not see was very little industrial development built. As Zach mentioned, in April of 2018, the City Council approved the Imagine Independence 2040. That is our current comprehensive plan. This plan started in 2016 and had many public engagement opportunities. It had Meeting in a Box, which was involved 30 participants. It had social media events where you had over 4,000 likes and 98 Facebook Live participants. It had a project website that had over 700 visitors, held 7 community events, 1 public meeting with over 100 attendees. It had a community survey which had 1,150 respondents, and it had 11 steering committee meetings. And out of that, a consistent theme was heard: develop an industrial park to attract jobs, attract and retain major employers, and develop a community with 21st century jobs. That feedback that we heard from the public led to changes in the future land use. The graph on the left side of the screen shows the industrial land use category occupying about 5.5% of the city's land. By 2040, we envisioned that to increase to slightly over 12% of the city's land. This aligned with the community's visions and goals that we heard from that public engagement process. The map on your screen is our current future land use plan. It has identified 2 industrial land use categories, business park and industrial. Business park is geared towards the lighter industries, while the industrial land use category is geared towards the more heavier industrial land use activities. That industrial land use category is only identified on the Lake City plant. All of the other industrial land use is classified as a business park, including this property that Van Trust is seeking to rezone. This map shows the current zoning. The land that Van Trust is proposing to rezone is currently zoned R6, with a little portion that is zoned I1, which is light industrial. The area immediately north is zoned R6 PUD and is undeveloped, while the areas to the south and east are also zoned R6, and those are undeveloped. The area to the west is zoned I1 and is currently undeveloped. Most of the zoning that you see on this map has generally been in place since the 1980s. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some recent development activity in the Little Blue Valley around this property. One of the first projects is the Prairie Landing development. This is a single-family development that includes 133 single-family homes on 50 acres. These plans were approved in 2006. Shortly after that, there was that Prairie Landing PUD. This development plan included single-family villas on the western side of Jackson Drive and 416 attached units on the 77 acres immediately to the north of the Van Trust property. Architectural Stone Products is a local manufacturer of stone and brick veneers. In 2018, they were looking for a place to grow. They applied to rezone the 7.7 acres at the southeast corner of R.D. Mize and Little Blue Parkway to I-1. That rezoning was approved in April of 2018. Fast forward to the end of 2018, and we had the Eastgate development. They submitted their rezoning application with the purpose of that rezoning to recruit 1 or more developers to the Eastgate business park so that the project could be as shovel-ready as possible. With that rezoning, they did not have any development plan. That application said that the floodplain and groundwater levels limit the types of development which are feasible on this property. That application said that single-family development was not feasible. It said that retail uses were not feasible given the changing dynamics of our internet economy. It said that the highest and best use was for business park type uses. That project received unanimous support from the Planning Commission, and at the City Council, the second reading was postponed pending a development agreement. Going to switch gears just a little bit. Earlier this year, the City Council created the Economic Development and Incentive Commission. This commission is made up of residents and members of the various taxing jurisdictions. It has the responsibilities to review applications for economic development incentives and to make recommendations to the City Council. In July of this year, the EDIC held a public meeting on the incentives for the Van Trust project. The EDIC had recommended unanimously to recommend the incentive to the City Council. In August of 2019, the City Council held a public hearing on those incentives, and the City Council unanimously approved those incentives to Van Trust. I will now turn it over to Brian Kidney to talk about the financial impact of this project.
Good evening. Brian Kidney, the Director of Finance and Administration. I was asked to make sure I speak up a little bit, so hopefully I don't yell too much. I want to just talk real quick about the fiscal impact to the city and other taxing districts as part of this project. Before I get into this table, which is just showing what the payment in lieu of taxes is, I thought I'd first talk a little bit about the mechanics of the financing itself, because I think there's been several questions about that. It's been called industrial revenue bond, and also has been said that the city doesn't have any obligation to make the payments back. And sometimes that's a little confusing when you hear the word bond in a city being part of the financing. It's kind of hard. The concept sometimes gets a little confusing. Why doesn't the city have any obligation on this? Which is a little bit different than the normal kind of financings we do for public improvements. And industrial revenue bond, or IRB, this is typically a financing that's authorized through either federal legislation or state legislation that allows a business to do a private financing, but part of the private financing allows that company to have either federal or state or local property tax exemptions. And that's really all this is. And the reason it's called industrial revenue bond is, originally it was the federal statutes first were written for industrial exemptions for property. Then it evolved over time, and the term IRB, or industrial revenue just bonding, just kind of stuck with it. But an IRB in the state of Missouri basically is that. It's a private financing between the owner and their private bank. And it's a transaction between those two. And the reason the city gets involved in it is because of the way the statutes are written to allow an exemption of property taxes. In Missouri and most states, everything is taxable unless they have exemptions from that tax. That's how tax code's usually written. Everything's taxable except for, and then they start listing what they're except for. And one of those except fors in Missouri is property owned by a municipality. And so that's how these abatements work, is through the transaction, through the private financing, the city gets title to the property. There's like a small dollar transaction or something, and it's just literally paper keeping by a trustee. So it all takes place at a trustee, and the city, for whatever period of that exemption, has title to it, but we can't touch that property because it's all built up around these walls of the legal transaction by the trust documents. And so what that does, though, is it means the whole property is exempt because it's a municipally owned property. So then a municipality or any taxing entity will then enter into a payment in lieu of taxes. So in this case, as the economic development package came through, it was determined that a 20% or thereabouts abatement would make sense for this property. And so what our economic development folks did is they backed into what does that equate to over the next 20 years. And instead of them being taxed, we work into an agreement with the owner and says, you pay it just like a tax, in lieu of a tax. And that's all taken care of, again, through the trustee. And it's a tax bill actually sent by the county, but it's not really a tax bill. It's an in lieu of bill, but it looks like a tax bill. So it really is a lot of things saying you're exempt, 20% exemption or 80% exemption, but really it's 100% exemption since it's the city property, or the city has an interest in that property and allows it to be exempt. And then there's this agreement then that says, here's our payment in lieu of tax agreement. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit and the fact that it's all within the trust document. And part of that trust document is the city is nowhere subject to or obligated to make any of the debt payments between the owner and their private financing. So I just wanted to confuse that issue a little bit more. Hopefully I didn't do that, but basically just kind of talk about, it's called industrial revenue bond. It's a bank legal transaction that takes place, and that's where some of the terminology gets to. Now, when it comes to the actual abatement itself, or that agreement that they're going to continue to pay taxes, I have this form up here, and I'm not sure, you probably can't see that. Hopefully you have that something in documentation. But one thing I did want to point out, and I have mine highlighted, of course you also can't see that, is during the life of this project, it's estimated that the payment in lieu of that the school district receives, and I think that's important because, you know, this went through the committee and all the taxing districts signed off on this, is because over that period of time, the school district in this estimate will be still receiving almost $1.9 million. And if there was not improvements on this property during that same period of time, they would receive about $6,700. So that's why you'll see, especially in this type of property, many taxing units, if there is a payment in lieu of tax part of it, very excited about that, especially for a school district that doesn't have a lot of service costs to this property, since there's no additional, it's not a residential where people are actually, they're servicing any students out of that. So to the school district, they're seeing an estimated $1.8 million out of this, and so.
Brian, let me make sure I understand that. This chart is based on a 20-year abatement.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. So over the 20 years, currently, if there was no development on this particular property in the independent school district, they would receive in 20 years $5,000 for operating and $1,400 for debt service in 20 years.
Correct.
Not every year, but over the
right.
total,
I think
over
the first
20
couple of years are like $600 or
Okay.
something. But
And then-
again, it's based on it staying the exact use that it is now.
Okay, and then based on the abatement that has been approved by the school district as part of the Economic Development and Incentives Committee and the City Council, they will receive, for the first 20 years of this project, $1.4 million for operating and $400,000 in debt service, compared to $5,000 and $1,400. And then after 20 years, I just want to make sure I'm capturing this. Once that abatement concludes in 20 years, is that the number becomes almost 8 million?
No.
Okay,
Close.
that's the part I don't
Yeah.
understand,
So,
is the projected tax revenue without abatement, what period of time?
So that's the same 20 years. And so
Okay.
that assumption is if there were no abatements whatsoever, but
But the
Van Trust
property
still
was
built the
improved.
property
Okay.
and developed this, then that would be 9.9 million, if you will. And then you
Okay.
see the next column then says, well, here's the amount that this agreement abates, which is the 6.4 million,
Okay.
and then the projected.
So you could, you could, do that calculation and figure out what that would be annually after the 20-year
Sure.
abatement concludes. I can't do that kind of math in my head, but,
Actually,
or
I do have
any
a
kind.
document, I do have a piece, document in there that.
Okay, and so
to
I'm,
tell you,
I'm
but
just using the school district
Sure.
because that's the largest taxing
Yeah.
jurisdiction. But obviously, there's Jackson County, a small portion for the city, the Mid-Continent Library, Metropolitan Junior College, and others included in here, but certainly the school district is the largest.
Right, the school district's the largest, and the
Okay.
total's 3.1 million. So, it would be safe to say if they're at the end of 20 years and there's no more growth, the next 20 years then would bring in 7.9 or the full 16 million, because it's 100%
Right.
property tax. And I do need to make comment. When I was talking about that transaction, it was only about the land itself, so the real property is the only thing that's abated. Any improvements that are subject to personal property are not abated to this program. So say, for instance, you can tell I eat a lot. So sandwich machine or something, they buy sandwich machines in there. And $1 million sandwich machine, if you could imagine how great that would be. That then would be 100% taxable. So this is only assuming, this doesn't even assume any of the real property, or personal property that will be added to any type of business that goes in there. And that would be 100%. And then finally, the third part of the abatement would be the sales tax abatement on the purchase of the material to build the material itself. And again, under that same concept of the city is exempt from sales tax, so would also that landowner at that time of purchasing the material to build it. I'm sorry, I'm using my hands a lot here, but so that's all I had. If there's any other questions about this.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good evening, Mayor Weir, members of the council. My name is Tom Lesnick. I am president of the Independence Economic Development Council. I want to talk a little about site selection process. That question has come up quite a bit in terms of how this site was determined. I think you've all heard me before talk about the need for industrial space. Historically, we have had fairly low vacancy rates. It usually hovers around 4%. Most of the space that we have on the market right now that is for manufacturing is fairly old, fairly outdated, fairly low ceiling heights, fairly restrictive to 21st century manufacturing. We have searched I've been here now almost 13 years, probably for all 13 years, we have searched for what we call shovel-ready sites. Sites where we can quickly construct buildings as necessary. We've looked at a lot of options, not only options within the Little Blue Valley, which is an easier location to develop because it's undeveloped area. It has land prices that are usually more affordable because they've been agricultural use. But we've also looked at redevelopment sites in other parts of the community. The challenge with this is we're trying to find sites that are at least 30 acres in size. A redevelopment site which would require acquisition of existing property, demolition of buildings, all of a sudden now for manufacturing, because lease rates for manufacturing in the metro are fairly low compared to other commercial rates. The challenge with that is that you just can't make it work financially. So greenfield sites are something that obviously are something that work better for a project like this. I think there's also a belief that economic developers point projects, or even cities point projects in specific locations. They tell them where to go. And it's actually the exact opposite. When a project comes across our desk, usually that project has a set of parameters we have to work within, such as utility needs. A manufacturing project may need rail access, utility needs. There's a variety of different things that are on the checklist that if you can meet those, you're allowed to submit to a project, submit information on a site or on a potential building, but it's all based on the criteria. If we lose a lot of credibility when we go out and try to push a project to a site that doesn't meet the criteria for the search. So why the Little Blue Valley for a business park? As I mentioned, open land spaces development is easier in those areas. We have a lot of utility infrastructure in place. There's still some places where it's lacking, but because we own a lot of our utilities, especially with the electric, a lot of the extensions that are kind of already in place, so the cost of that in some locations is not very significant. Land cost ranges are kind of within that sweet spot. The developers can build buildings and be cost effective on their lease rates when they lease those. And as Mr. Scannell mentioned, the comprehensive plan in '99 called for about 2 million square foot of industrial space.
Tom, can I ask you, the land cost, can you tell us what that range is?
Generally for industrial, you need to be below $1 a square foot. Because when you factor in land cost, and then there's other things, site development costs play into it as well. So if you're dealing with floodplain, and just showing the visual I have up here, I think 40 or 50 years ago they thought this site might be good for a lake, and they were probably right because there's a lot of floodplain through the valley. And really the Little Blue Parkway kind of dissects that floodplain because it kind of follows along with the Little Blue River. But $1 or less per square foot, depending on what site development costs are. If you have to raise the site out of the floodplain, that impacts it. If you have to extend utilities, that impacts it. If you have to extend street infrastructure, all that impacts it. And then you've got to build a building on top of that. And again, we're not talking about metal buildings that you can build at low cost. We're talking about higher quality tilt-up concrete construction. And so that cost is higher than what would be considered a metal prefab building. So sites we've identified within the Little Blue Valley, because we've really focused on that, again, because it meets the criteria for what we're looking for in a business park site. I've got a list of them up there. I'm gonna change the slide and kind of show you kind of a visual of where these locations are at. Lake City, the ammunition plant, there's 4,000 acres out there. There's 1,000 acres within that site that are part of the Missouri Certified Sites Program. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago, that site was certified by the state of Missouri through the Certified Sites Program. And that says that site is shovel ready. That means the utilities are in place. You can move very quickly in getting something developed in that space. The challenge with that space is numerous. First of all, it's behind a secure fence. It makes it challenging right now for companies to do business, getting vehicles in and out of there, getting employees in and out of there. It also has the challenge of being owned by the government. The maximum lease that government can do on land is 25 years as of right now. That's a little problematic for somebody wanting to invest millions of dollars. Also with the stipulation that if national security warrants it, they can take control of that land. Most developers don't want to take that risk with a site like that. Just across the street from that is what we call the Independence Business Park. That was originally developed around 2010. We worked with a developer out of St. Louis called Clayco. Clayco put together a fairly comprehensive development plan. That site's about 500 acres in size, owned by a single owner. It's actually dissected. There's 300 acres to the north and 200 acres on the south of Missouri 78, or what we would call 23rd Street. And that site we've pitched to numerous projects over the years. Clayco was not able to get any traction with it. It's been on the market really for the last 9 years since we did the original development plan. This is a site that we pitched to fairly large projects. Anybody needing 50 or more acres in size, it works fairly well. Kubota Tractors was one of the projects more recently that looked at this site. For them, the major issues were the fact that most of this site, almost all 500 acres, is within either 100 or 500 year floodplain. It's also fairly distant from Interstate 70. Truman and 23rd was a site that shows up in the Little Blue comp plan from 1999. We've looked at that site, looked at that area. Most manufacturers that see that site see it as heavy industrial because of its proximity to the power plant. They see the big smokestack and they feel like that's better suited for heavier industrial use. We also don't really have a landowner in that area interested in selling, and that's one of the factors as well. All three of those sites to the north, the closest one's about 4 miles from I-70, and so transportation access always plays an important decision in all these because distance is money in most cases. For manufacturers, they've got raw goods coming in and they've got finished goods going out. That additional 4 miles just in transportation costs, even though it doesn't sound like much for 4 miles, most manufacturers want to be as close to the interstate as possible. So that moves us south. We have the Eastgate project. We've talked about that in the past. We worked with the property owner on that to develop a site plan for the property. The property owner wanted smaller industrial spaces, kind of a mixed use, some office spaces. What we found, we worked with a developer, got fairly long ways down the road with them. They couldn't make it work financially. The size of the buildings, the smaller the building, the more expensive per square foot it is to build. It was going to require about $1 million from the City of Independence to build road infrastructure to get to the building. And even with that in there, it just wouldn't work. The office space demand right now is non-existent for this location. Commerce Center, that's the one we're talking about tonight. It's got its challenges as well. No site's perfect, but it was priced right. It's been on the market for several years. It works from that standpoint, but it also has some floodplain issues that have to be addressed by the developer. But it works from that standpoint. It's adjacent to existing industrial, and in the comp plan it is shown as business park use. And then finally, the last one I'll talk about is one we call the Miller property. That is an acreage that's along I-70, and it actually faces towards I-70, access off Woods Chapel Road. The site's fairly expensive from a cost per square foot. It has a limited access frontage road to get access to that. It has no sewer infrastructure, so the cost of development for that were very difficult. I should also mention the business park site up to the north by Lake City also needs about $2.5 million of infrastructure with electric and with sewer. These are some pictures of the site plans for a few of those that we've done. This is the Clayco project, their original design, showing the use of that 500 acres. This is the Eastgate project.
I'm sorry,
yes.
is that the Independence Business Park?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry. It was Independence Business Park. You can see
So
the
that's
roundabout
one
there. That's right
at
there. What's that?
7 and 78.
7 and 78.
Okay.
The roundabout is right there at 7 and 78. To the bottom left-hand corner of the screen is Lake City. This is you can see the different phases for the Eastgate project. And then this is some designs that were done initially for the Miller property along I-70. This is just to the south of the Stone Canyon Golf Course. So we are being left behind. We are missing out on opportunities. This is speculative space, and so there's a lot of risk to the developer, but it's a calculated risk. 1.5 million square foot of industrial space was constructed in the first half of this year. There'll be another 1.7 million square feet that'll be delivered by the end of this year, and 3.1 million square feet of industrial space was absorbed in the third quarter alone this year in the Kansas City Metro. So we went to the Kansas City Area Development Council. We said, okay, if buildings like this existed within Independence, how many projects that you worked in the last 12 months would have fit into these buildings? And what we found out, there were 30 projects that KCADC was working that would meet the specifications. 23 of those projects were manufacturing, 7 were warehouse distribution. 20 of those projects remain active today. They have still not found a location. 2 located outside the metro, 4 within the metro, 1 in Missouri, 3 in Kansas, and 4 of these 30 projects are in an inactive status. And so we also looked at what are the wage rates for the types of jobs for the companies that KCADC was working with. And this is a range. Not all projects had wage ranges in them, but it ranged anywhere from $17.78 an hour for warehouse distribution to $43.41 for plastic manufacturing. I should note that for state incentives in the state of Missouri, the minimum requirement for wages is $40,000 annual wages for full-time employment. You also must provide 50% of the health insurance premium for that employee in order to receive state incentives under the Missouri Works program. So do we need jobs? Right now there's about 1,600 residents in our community who are out of work and they're actively seeking jobs while drawing unemployment benefits. There are 18,000 residents who leave our community every single day for jobs in other communities. We're lagging greatly behind surrounding communities. Green Valley exceeds our median household income by 10,000, 17,000 in Blue Springs, 32,000 in Lee Summit. And I always like to point out, for every 1,000 in median income growth, that means $50 million in economic activity here in Independence. The last thing I'll leave you with is a chart that we got from the Kansas City Area Development Council on Friday. They had their annual luncheon, and they always like to tout their successes during 2019. You'll notice the numbers at the very top in terms of number of jobs, the capital investment, the most square foot that was built out, and you'll notice the projects down below there. You'll notice that Independence is absent from all those projects. Growth is a big part of Independence for All. I'm not satisfied with what our organization has done to support that, and I hope you aren't either. You know, we can do great things in this community, but you got to give me some tools to work with. And so I'll glad to take any questions.
Tom, I have one question because I think it predated November of 2018. The project that went to Blue Springs that we were in competition for, where, can you talk, there were many factors. I think one that has gained some attention is our electric rate, which we since have lowered by 6%. But can you talk about, in terms of facilities, what they were looking for, and if that was going to be a build to suit, and what that would look like?
They were looking for a land site, so they were going to build their own building.
Okay.
They own their building that they're in, is my understanding. They were looking for roughly about, they would like to have about 20 to 30 acres, give some growth for expansion. For us, you know, the site that we pointed them to, because of their schedule, they were on a tight time frame. They needed to start construction probably within 6 months before they even made a decision, and be operational at a certain date, because they're an auto parts manufacturer and they have a contract with a manufacturer. So they had to be up and running fairly quickly. The site we proposed to them was a site north of Cargo Largo, primarily because it's zoned correctly right now as of today. Our concern with any other site is that we didn't have the zoning in place to meet their timeline. So in that case, we only had one site to show them. That site is challenged. It has some limited rail access that kind of limits the ability to get through there in intersections. And for them, the site in Blue Springs was much better. And again, even though the Cargo Largo site was fairly close to I-70, Blue Springs site was right on I-70.
Okay. Amazon HQ2.
Yes.
Independence was included in the Kansas City proposal when that project was still active. Can you talk about their needs and demands in the sites that we submitted?
Their demands were everything.
Were a lot, yes.
There was everything, the moon, the sun, the stars.
Yeah.
But we proposed the Eastgate site for that particular one. That was mainly office facilities, an office campus type of setting. I thought we showed fairly well. We didn't get a lot of feedback. In fact, none of the cities that got eliminated after the first round got much feedback on that site. But for us, we felt it was a good use in the valley. Obviously, would have been a significant investment by Amazon. It was probably one of the bigger projects I think any community will ever see come across their desk. And we were, our site was competitive enough and a good enough a location, because there was probably, I would say there's probably 60 or 70 sites in the metro that were submitted, for KCADC to kind of review. I can't remember, it was 8 or 9 that actually got submitted to Amazon, and this was one of the 8 or 9 sites. So out of all those sites, we showed pretty well. This community showed they had the workforce to serve Amazon, but at the end of the day, they didn't select the Kansas City Metro.
And this, which I think is probably difficult for people to see, but there's 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 projects on here. Were we at any time in competition for any of these?
Yes, we were. Yep.
And we were not selected because we did not have a building available?
Not so much building. In a lot of cases, they were looking for sites.
Okay.
There were several that were looking for sites within that list. I think Niagara Water was one of those. Project Ribeye was another one of those. The only site we had that would meet their requirement was in the Independence Business Park, and the feedback on all of those too far from the interstate every single time. The floodplain also played into it as well. You can mitigate floodplain. I can't change the distance to the interstate.
Okay, thank you.
A question, Mayor.
Yes.
So is the, besides not having buildings ready to go, is the electric rates in Independence still a barrier to some of these businesses coming here, even if we have the buildings?
I will say, Councilman Robertson, it's less of an issue than it was before. It is improved. The perception of electric rates has improved greatly. I still think there's work probably to be done, but I think the consolidation of the rates helped a lot of people better understand the rate structure. And you have made significant changes in the rates. There's probably still a little bit of work to do on the industrial side. I think commercial is still carrying a lot of the load of electric rates in the city, but I don't think it's the inhibitor that it was before. I'll tell you, with the project that went to Blue Springs, it was a big inhibitor because they came to us with a utility bill from a similar facility in Kentucky. The utility bill there was, I want to say, about roughly $900,000 a year for electrical usage. Our rate, apples to apples, was $1.5 million. So, made a difference. Anything
Thank
else?
you.
Thank you.
There may be more questions at the end, but while we continue.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Terrific. First off, thanks for allowing us to be here tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss this project, and we'll do our very best to stick to the facts and make this not a sales pitch, as was mentioned earlier. I do want to comment that these types of work sessions are critical to the process. Candidly, not many developers will tell you this, but I like seeing a full room like this because these sorts of conversations need to happen out in the open. And we want to make sure that everybody's got the best information possible as we go forward. I'm going to keep my comments brief at the beginning and turn things over to Grant here in a moment, who's the lead developer on this project. But what I want to just say at the outset here is, there was a lot of robust conversation at the Planning Commission meeting. There were a lot of points that were made, a lot of very good points, quite honestly, about the development as it was currently proposed. We took those comments, whether they be where the dock doors were located, where the trailer storage was outboard to the buildings, the number of curb cuts along Little Blue Parkway, the amount of green space, the setbacks, and we rolled up our sleeves after that meeting and have come back with just a quick stab at some low-hanging fruit of things that we think we can get done that helps respond to some of the concerns that were raised in the last meeting. And so with that, I'd like to turn things over to Grant, who will kind of present some information to everybody in a before and after sort of format. So with that, Grant. Excuse me.
Good evening, Grant Harrison, Van Trust Real Estate. Thank you all for your time tonight. This is the general layout that we provided. I'm afraid the color came off this, but what we were trying to show was two buildings. They're not cross-docked anymore, so we have office on the north building on the north side, auto parking, and entry features for office. On the southern building, we have office as well on the south side. All the docks are now located on one side per building and interior to the site. These buildings are now smaller. We've decreased square footage about 90,000 square feet overall. What that allowed us to do was substantially increase the buffer, the green space setbacks. On the north side, we're roughly 112 feet, opposed to 15 feet as originally proposed from property line to parking. The south side's about 130 feet, and but for a couple sections where parking jets in on Little Blue, we're about 75 feet versus 15 feet. On the west side from property line, we're about 50 feet setback. So overall, the acreage has stayed the same, but we've increased green space by over 5 acres, which we felt was a good step forward. We can introduce a lot more landscaping, a lot more areas for pervious, and maybe to able and accommodate more stormwater on site. One of the big changes on the original plan, we had 3 right-in, right-outs onto Little Blue Parkway. Primary access in and out was off Jackson Drive to the west. We now have 1 entry off Jackson Drive and 1 entry right in, right out only onto Little Blue Parkway. So eliminated 2 major curb cuts or tie-ins to Little Blue. What I mentioned verbally is here in this side-by-side. Again, square footage went down a fairly decent amount. We've increased that green space. Overall trailer storage, which would be accommodated as future, is now interior to the site. Parking went up for auto or customers and employees by about 60. The overall dock doors day one stayed about the same, but max dock doors went out or were reduced by about half. So again, these are single loaded buildings versus the cross dock scenario as originally proposed.
I think that's it. We don't have them?
As luck would have it, it seems that technology has conspired against us here, and so I'm glad this is an
Yeah, this
informational
is all we
meeting.
had in our packet.
Okay.
Okay. But if you
Yeah, I certainly.
can describe, if you want to continue with your presentation, sorry, we don't have.
No, it's quite all right. I think what's important for everybody to understand is that the plan before this nondescript plan showed up is we ended up with setbacks all around the project that basically approximated the minimums, okay? Right now, as Grant had mentioned, those setbacks on the north and south against those neighbors and to the north and south went from 15 feet to about 135, 140 feet. So we've almost 10 times the setback that we had on the north and the south sides. The setbacks on the east and the west to Little Blue Parkway and to Jackson, those increased by 4 to 7 times, depending on where you are kind of measuring from. So massive reduction of impervious area and building space. So the buildings have gotten smaller, parking areas have gotten smaller. We had outboard trailer storage on the north and the south. We took that, as you can probably not see on this image, we've taken that and brought it all inboard, in between the two buildings, so that the buildings themselves are now screening that trailer storage, which is where the dock doors are located now. We no longer have dock doors facing the neighbors to the north and the south. What we have there will be highly articulated elevations that give an appearance more of an office or a flex building type of structure. A little bit more in line with maybe what folks' expectations or mental images are for these types of for the types of buildings that you might see in a business park. But the big thing really is the amount of green space that Grant had mentioned. We added 5 acres of green space within the same boundaries that we had before, whether that be for additional landscaping, trees, bushes, screening of the buildings, or even stormwater detention, BMP, quality stormwater detention as well. So I think in large part what we tried to do, and unfortunately what we've not illustrated well for you tonight, is a major step forward, and in our opinion, in terms of hearing what people were saying when we got together last in front of Planning Commission, and trying to take that, internalize it, and make a project better so we could be a better neighbor to the community that we would like to be a long-term member of. And so with that, would certainly stand, Grant and I, for questions.
Mr. City Manager, we'll get these additional slides and put them in the presentation and make that, we make this all available on our city website so we can, I'm sorry,
Please.
I apologize, it's our, for not having those this evening, but we will certainly get those added so the public can see them. What I'd like to ask is, this is speculative space, we all are aware of that. That doesn't mean that were you to build a project here in Independence that you would not have tenants by the time the project was completed, but you do not have any tenants now, which makes it difficult for us to know exactly the types of use that this would accommodate. But I think it's important for us to understand the lease rates that are being proposed for this building compared to what Class A means. When we talk about Class A industrial or business park development, whichever way you want to categorize that, what is the lease rate? What are the types of businesses that are likely to pay that compared to what we currently have available in Independence?
Sure. And Grant, you want to stand up here, and we'll both kind of ham and egg
Yeah.
kind of the answer to that, if that's okay with
Yeah.
you. But as it relates to the Class A definition, it really has, it speaks to quality, as Class A typically would. And that speaks to whether or not the building is a state-of-the-art type of building. What is it constructed of? What are the ceiling heights? what sort of infrastructure, what sort of parking trailers, those sorts of things. And that ends up being a fairly robust building. It's an investment grade building. This is not a metal building. This is not something that you would be afraid to have as a neighbor from a quality perspective. This is something that's kind of designed as if we were going to hold it forever. It's got a specification to it that is lasting. It reduces maintenance. You know, we're interested in the operating costs of these things just as everybody else is, and so we're doing things with the long term in mind. And do you want to speak a little bit about kind of Class A and where that rent structure lands?
Sure. So, again, we're going to preach flexibility. We don't know who's coming in here yet, but we want to make these the best mousetrap as possible. These could be 3 to 4 tenants per building. They could be 1 or 2. But these lease rates will more likely be $4.25 up to $5 on a triple net side, depending on what they need from us in terms of fit out and investment inside. And that can really vary depending on the office build out, additional power, additional lights. There's a lot of modifications that can go into these buildings which can skew that. But that is an upper rate for this market, and we believe we can achieve that here with this product.
Okay, thank you. So, again, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to pin you down too much because we know that it's flex, we know that it's speculative, but when I look at the projects that that KCADC has landed in this area over the last year, are these Class A projects? Do you know? I mean, do you know? And are those lease? I guess what I'm trying to determine is what we have now, in terms of industrial space, is Alice Chalmers, which leases at, I don't know, $1 a square foot. $2 to $2.25. So this is double. I mean, we can anticipate that we're going to get double that, and it's reflected in the quality and the use. Our goal is to have high quality development and independence. And so I think that that's a distinction that's worth making. The underground facilities, the caves that are, certainly suitable for manufacturing, distribution, but also warehousing and storage, don't lease for $4.25 a square feet. But
Typically speaking, the types of buildings that we're proposing are in the bullseye of what the Kansas City Area Development Council are looking for as it relates to having product in their inventory to go hunting with when they go out and are trying to lure projects into Kansas City, the metro in general. Those companies, and typically the companies that are going into these Class A buildings, they're national for the most part, or large regional companies. And even at the $4.25 to $5 that Grant referenced, those are in the sweet spot of what they would expect to pay on a typical basis, irrespective of where they were in the country. Now, obviously, you get out on the coast and some other places, it gets much more expensive because construction and land is more expensive. But in comparable markets, with comparable populations, and comparable economic conditions, these projects are right in the bullseye. And that's important to us because, as we had mentioned, these are speculative projects. Our goal is to create something that's the most flexible mousetrap to be able to go out and catch the best tenants that we can, and as many of them as we can, and to have it serve as a magnet for growth.
okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Questions?
Madam Mayor? Is there a plan to take this revised plan back to Planning Commission? Mr. City Manager?
So at this juncture, we have just, here's where we're at tonight. We have not obviously had first reading or second and final reading of this. I would want to dialogue with you as the council and get your input about how to handle that.
I don't believe we had a first reading yet.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I misspoke. We've not had first reading. We intentionally have pumped the brakes on this based on the outcry of interest on this, and to take the opportunity to present this here tonight and get the feedback. We've not really even had any internal staff dialogues about what next steps look like beyond making sure we had that opportunity to present here tonight about where we presently stand. So we're very open to having dialogue as the council sees fit about which route we go down here.
Sir, is Van Trust willing to go back to Planning Commission?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor,
Yes. You guys can sit down. If we have, do you have questions for these guys or just in
Yes.
general? Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks.
So just a couple quick questions. One of them has to do with stormwater retention basins. I don't see it on the drawing that we have, but we just have a simple little drawing. Is that part of the plan? Are you going to have some water retention basin as part of that green space on the property?
We're going to need to reevaluate the entire plan, honestly, now. As you all know, we are also looking to the piece to the west, which is zoned industrial. There is a detention basin there now, accommodating a large piece. We hope to maybe tie those together, do some on our site and do some on the west, but we need to study that a little further and improve on what we originally presented on the bigger plan.
I have to tell you, that's one of my concerns, especially since you're going to raise the ground level another 5 or 6 feet, and everything else around you is going to be where the water drains, including Jackson Drive and Little Blue Parkway. So that's going to dump a lot of water into the storm sewer system and directly into the Little Blue. Obviously, everything flows down to the Little Blue, which isn't very far away from there. So I would hope that that would be part of the new plan or the new drawings, since I didn't see that on the plan. And with these new drawings, or at least this one sheet that we were given, it doesn't appear that there's any cross-dock type of facilities there. So evidently that eliminates that type of business from coming in there. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yep.
And as far as warehousing, it would be very limited, because again, there wouldn't be the number of dock doors or facilities to load and unload.
Talk about the differences.
It would be probably limited to whatever businesses were in there manufacturing or producing, probably. Is that right?
It can still serve as light industrial, warehousing, distribution, light manufacturing. There is no cross-dock component. So heavy truck traffic and in and out functions are limited in this scenario.
So it would, that was the other question, so it would limit the amount of truck traffic because there's not the number of dock doors and that sort of thing.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
what are you estimating, and are you going to do a traffic study, or is the city going to do a traffic study?
We
possibly?
did complete and submit a traffic study on the original plan, which
Yeah.
had additional square footage, so we can dust that off, but that would have accommodated everything we've studied to date, so.
Okay.
And, or civil engineers here to answer more specific questions on traffic, but we used industry standards when we did that traffic study.
But you're looking at a much lower truck traffic
Now,
as a result.
yes.
The building area is smaller, the docks have reduced. Intuitively, there's going to be less traffic. So
Very
I would
good.
assume that under the current traffic study that did cover all that, we're probably okay, but we could dust that off.
And it looks like from this drawing that there's kind of buffered areas at the corners of the building facing where the docks would be, which would shield that from view. I don't know if that's office space or
How can you tell?
some other type of part of the building, but
So all of the office on the southern building would be on the south facades and southeast and southwest corner. On the north, it'd be on the north facade, several different entry points in the northeast and northwest.
that's where all the car parking is, and you've greatly increased, I see, the car parking.
Yes.
At least it looks like it from the
Yes,
drawing.
we have. So viewing into the truck court and that future trailer storage, we'll do everything we can to introduce landscaping, trees, bushes, evergreens, to try to block those corridors in and protect that view into the truck courts. And again, we haven't advanced landscaping on this new set yet, so.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I may. Sorry, we're not done yet. We'll try to get out here by 10 o'clock, though, for sure. That's the goal. I have a kind of a unique perspective, I think, on the Little Blue Valley that we have here and some of the development. Some of you may or may not know, I was on the city council from 1996 to 2004 as we were developing these concepts, these thoughts, these ideas. When I first got on the council, there was no ground being moved, no roads being built yet. We were doing the financial studies, environmental impact studies. Fast forward all the way to now. Well, excuse me, let's go to 1998 with engagements that we had. We had plenty of engagement discussion with property owners, potential business owners, rezoning the property out there. Hold several of them at Bridger Junior High School. Had a lot of engagement discussion. That whole valley, and the idea was to be developed with all the different mixed uses, that was just elaborated and given to us tonight. So within the discussion that we had, these engagements, it was very critical. It was highly important to get some feedback. Fast forward to now, development has occurred to a smaller degree with our residential development along there. So they are now sunk into our community as they should be, and they should be the partner in our community here, as well as any new business that comes forward. We'd like to have that partnership. Are you on any serious time constraint being, if we're going to suggest going back to the Planning Commission, and I'm not the council person for this district, a very open discussion, visual discussion with the property owners that are going to be close to this, live by this, I think we should have a community meeting, I would think, to have this discussed, since they are part of that development there. Is that, I'm not your council person, I'm not going to make that decision, but would that be something you'd be willing to do? Can you fit that in a time frame that's allowable in your world of developing?
Yeah, similarly to our willingness to go back through the process on the Planning Commission side, and as I opened up my comments today, we're all about being transparent. We're happy to have a community meeting. We're happy to do that as quickly as possible because time is important. And we're obliged to do that. We would look to the city to help inform who might want to attend so that we don't have to try to hunt everybody down. Sometimes it gets difficult when we might have left somebody off a list somewhere.
I bet you the word would get out.
Yeah.
Betcha.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the first one of those meetings we've had. But we'd be happy to. That being said, I do want to be clear. This is the direction that we're going. This is what we would like to see.
Sure.
And for another point of clarity, we do not own the site. That's also probably something that's important here. But we do think that something like this could happen. And I think given the thought that went into the plan, that went up and down this corridor, and the idea of business parks, I think it's important to bear in mind that a project like this is a first step. A first step, it's like filling a glass jar with rocks, right?
Sure.
It's rocks, it's pebbles, it's sand, it's water. This is kind of the first thing. When you get to the business park image that a lot of people have in their minds, it starts with a larger project, and the smaller pieces kind of fit in around those things to kind of create the fabric of that park. We do a lot of mixed-use development all over the country. Not every parcel is mixed use. Every parcel has got a use, but when you look at them collectively, that's where the mix of uses comes from. And I think this is going to be a similar thing. The project that we're proposing is not something that would preclude the business park that I think occupies a lot of people's minds.
Well, there's definitely questions and concerns and thoughts of going on. I know I've received numerous emails like my colleagues have had. And if
we
we're
have
gonna,
too.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you're in the unique spot that we've had our commercial develop or our retail develop out, I think, to capacity. So now we're moving into this next phase. And you're the first part of this first phase. So we would like to see whatever is developed there in high quality, in aesthetic, of pleasing, because we have great community partnerships that are already here and anchored. So that would be one of the steps I would like to see take place, just so everybody here has a good understanding of what we're looking at and how we're developing out, because I'm venturing to guess not a lot of people were here back in the mid-1990s and early 2000s to really understand what we want to do for that whole valley.
Understood.
Thank you.
Yep.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
One more
Yes,
question.
go ahead.
I am the councilman for this part of Independence, so this is in my district. And I think it's imperative that we allow citizens to speak again at an open hearing at a planning commission. So it's my intention to bring this up at the council meeting next week and ask that we send it back to the planning commission as soon as possible, but also asking for you all from Van Trust to flesh out some of these plans, because there's not a lot of detail.
We had about 3 days to do it.
I know, but if you could at least
Yep.
have the architect or whoever you're working with
Sure.
flesh out some of those plans, give a little more detail and a little more information so they actually can see that and have that information in hand when they come to the planning commission. And then possibly we can let, on City 7, we can let the citizens know.
Yeah, it would be
They
my
can have a
expectation that we
community
would produce a,
Pardon?
I'm sorry.
Are you willing to have a community meeting even before you go back to the planning commission?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when I was on Planning Commission, we found a lot of things could be ironed out before the actual meeting. And it reduced a lot of anxiety, and so I would just strongly encourage that.
I think we probably have a lot of the information that didn't show up here tonight is probably a good starting point to where we could have that conversation, and then whatever we can glean from those conversations, take forward with us to the engineers and architects so that when we produce a revised planning commission submittal, preliminary development plan, it will include those comments as well.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, Councilman?
This is more than halfway. Thank you. I mean, I'm not saying it's the end gate or the absolute or anything like this, but this promises a future here because you went this way. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, before we move on to our next agenda item, are there any other comments or questions on this presentation? Okay, thank you all very much for a very thorough presentation. Our next topic, Mr. City Manager, is IPL production update and discussion of next steps.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, almost fully 2 years ago, we began a journey to really look at meeting our community's energy production and supply needs. The council commissioned back in November of 2017 an energy master plan study to find out how are we going to
Mr.
supply
City
our...
Manager, let me just give people a minute to, I don't want you to have
That's
to
fine.
talk over the rustling.
It's
so
fine.
We'll give them a few minutes.
Y'all come back real soon.
Graduated from high school with him.
What's that?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Don't get sidetracked. Okay, keep moving. I guess. Looks that way. Okay. Yeah, you need a hall pass? Yeah. As soon as I get one back,
Did I miss anything?
Okay, Mr. City Manager?
Okay, Madam Mayor, members of the council, try to not take that personally. As I was saying, in November of 2017, nope, apparently still not.
Okay,
Take 3.
okay.
November 2017,
Yeah.
city began a journey to really identify how we were going to supply our energy capacity needs for the foreseeable future with the issuance of the Energy Master Plan. That decision, of course, was settled with the city's decision to contract with Oneta for power capacity, but several critical decisions still remain, not the least of which is determining the ultimate fate of the Blue Valley Power Plant. What does it mean to close it? When will we close it? What aspects will we continue to retain and utilize? What won't? And of course, what is the future of that site? So last week at the Public Utility Advisory Board, that body heard a presentation from Assistant City Manager Mark Randall on update on the Blue Valley site, as well as recommended approval of a resolution, which you'll see next Monday night, providing some direction on these topics. So tonight, Mark Randall is going to provide that same presentation to you. And then, as I mentioned, next week we'll have that resolution, hopefully garnering some additional direction. So at this time, I will yield to Assistant City Manager Mark Randall.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Again, I'm Mark Randall, Assistant City Manager, and I'm here to present do a presentation that we've titled IPL Production Update and Discussion of Next Steps. The purpose of this is to, as it says, give you an update, but one of the key things is to identify important decision points for the council as we go forward in this process. As we talk about production assets at IPL, we're really talking about the Blue Valley Power Plant and the 6 combustion turbines that we have in our system. First, we're going to talk about the Blue Valley plant, and as we have that part of the presentation, we'll talk about a recap, which really talking about how did we get where we are now. Then we'll talk about what the current status of the plant is, and then we'll talk about next steps and those important council decision points I referred to. Among those next steps is setting a date for closure, then a transition plan for impacted employees, and then to talk about the potential for repurposing that facility. When we talk about the combustion turbines, we'll talk about, again, how did we get where we are today, what the current status of those 6 combustion turbines, what the status is, and talk about those next steps as well. So first, on the Blue Valley recap. June 2017, Management Partners Audit included a recommendation for an Energy Master Plan. In November 2017, the City Council approved a contract with Burns & McDonnell for the Energy Master Plan. In September of 2018, the Master Plan report was submitted, and it recommended retiring the Blue Valley plant and issuing a request for proposals for less expensive capacity to replace capacity lost with Blue Valley closure. May 2019, Council approved a 10-year, $13.6 million capacity contract with Oneta for 45 megawatts. Oneta, as you'll recall, is a 1,133 megawatt natural gas combined cycle plant located in Coweta, Oklahoma, which went into service in 2002. The Oneta contract included an opt-out provision if transmission upgrade costs exceed $1 million. The city has notified SPP, Southwest Power Pool, of our intent to replace Blue Valley capacity with the Oneta power purchase contract, and that Oneta contract is scheduled to start June 1st, 2020. Now, it says on the slide the city is awaiting actual transmission costs and approval of a capacity change from SPP, and the preliminary indications were that transmission costs will be well under $1 million threshold for opt-out. We now as of last week, we did get information from SPP telling us that the transmission upgrade costs will be well below $1 million. So therefore, the Onetta contract will take effect June 1st, 2020. Now, while we're waiting on all the approvals and waiting for that eventual closure date, the IPL Production Division has been working to maximize revenue from Blue Valley prior to closure. The increased operation of Blue Valley has resulted in new revenue. While not enough to cover both base costs and the variable costs from running, fuel and overtime, revenues have exceeded the variable costs for running by $400,000 since the start of the fiscal year. The current level of production would not be sustainable long-term with the aging equipment, but can be done short-term to maximize revenue. So this is where I really want to praise our production division, because they've really been putting the pedal to the metal on this aging equipment, trying to maximize its revenue potential before it's closed. We have a certain base expense level just to fulfill our capacity requirements. It has to have the ability to operate, but that doesn't mean it actually has to run. But they are actually running it pedal to the metal to try to maximize revenue, and since the first of the year, Blue Valley has produced $400,000 over and above those variable costs. This slide shows you, give you an idea of the difference here. This is July and August of 2016. This shows the days it ran in that time frame. Now compare that slide to this one, which shows July, August 2019. So it's been running a lot more. It's been running really close to capacity. And again, as I said, it's really not a level of production that could be sustained long-term with this, with the assets that we have there. But it's something that they really are doing to try to maximize revenue before it closes. Go ahead, Councilman.
Can I ask you a question at this point? So since we're running Blue Valley a lot more right now, is it being called on, or is it being sold to SPP?
Yes, and they have...
at their request? Or?
Yes,
okay.
SPP is.
Okay.
And it's because to try to maximize revenue, they have really gone down to a minimum notification limit. You can tell them when you're bidding in how long advance notice they have to give you so you can fire up the plant. They now have it where it's a 10-hour, a minimum 10-hour run, which is very low amount of time running, rather than saying we have to be for several days, which will make them less likely to call you. And the amount of notice they have to give is reduced. So that's why they're really making an effort to try to maximize the revenue by operating. So that kind of gives you an idea about the current status of Blue Valley. But obviously it's not going to last forever. This can't be sustained. And that, so really, we need to talk about the closure. Blue Valley closure, which was recommended in the Energy Master Plan, was expected to occur about 6 months after SPP approval was received. And so we knew that around November 15th, we'd get notification about the transmission costs, which that has come in, as I mentioned. So June 1st, 2020 has been established as a tentative closure date, which corresponds with the date that we set for the start of the Onetta power purchase contract. But the actual date for the closure of Blue Valley plant has not been established, and it will be set by the City Council. So that is probably the first of really critical decision steps that the Council has to make. Continuing on the Blue Valley next steps, an important thing is the transition plan for impacted production employees. As we've talked about before, the number of employees has been reduced quite a bit. In 2019-20 budget, there are 40 full-time positions in production, which that compares to 60 in 2017 and 18. The number of actual employees has been reduced greatly in those in the last couple of years. So the Energy Master Plan recommended, though, retaining as many as 23 FTEs in a much reduced production group, focused on the care and operation of the 6 combustion turbines that are not associated with Blue Valley plant. Now, it's anticipated that future operations and future study will determine the actual number of production personnel needed for operation of the six CTs. But even taking the recommendation from that master plan, which would be to retain 23, that would be 23 of the existing 40 positions there. So you see a number of employees will be impacted by this closure. So a consultant, Darda HR, has been retained by the city to assist human resources in the development of a transition plan for impacted employees. The transition plan for impacted employees in the production division is expected to be ready for your consideration in December of 2019. The goal is to have a plan in place and presented to you and then presented to employees well in advance of actual plant closure. That's another critical decision point for the city council going forward.
Madam Mayor, if I can
Yes.
interrupt. Within that transition plan, Mr. Assistant City Manager, is the IBEW, are they involved in those discussions, see what that would look like with their
Correct.
membership and impact there?
Correct. Yes, I should mention that the negotiations with IBEW are actually underway now already.
Correct.
And this has been a key point of discussion. So yes, it'll be discussed with them as well and be part of that negotiation.
Are they going to have a significant input in that role?
Well, I would probably defer that to the city manager and assistant city manager, Adam Norris, who's involved with our negotiation with the IBEW. But I would say that yes, it'll be from what I know from talking to the IBEW people, it is a very important part of their consideration. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, gentlemen?
I would probably simply just add that, as Mr. Randall pointed out, we're at the very early stages of labor negotiations with IBEW Local 53. This is a very important consideration in those negotiations, and primarily because, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, like most of us, they want to know what does closure mean, how many employees need to be retained to fulfill the duties that we continue to hold on after this, and for those employees who maybe aren't retained, how are they handled, how are they treated, et cetera. So there's their biggest issues in negotiations are to bring clarity so that then we can begin having the conversations about how to proceed from there.
Well, I want to just make sure that we don't lose sight of the human element that we're
Exactly.
working with here. That's highly important, so thank you.
Exactly. And I thank you
Mark?
for that point.
How many of these, out of these 40, can retire? How many is eligible to retire?
Well, if I can get into that kind of detail, a very good number of them probably, well, the various stages of retirement. There's some that are eligible for the loggers retirement system, but they're, perhaps they have Social Security, but they're not Medicare eligible. I mean, there's people all along this continuum, but there's several of them that are close to retirement of one type or another.
Depends on when we close, right?
Right. So it's kind of, and like, again, I want to praise the production division, the managers there, Marty Barker and Elaine Kafis. They've really worked hard to try to reduce, not fill vacancies whenever they could, so they could reduce the number of employees impacted, because they all know, as Councilman said, we want to do the right thing here. So, and that's what, but your good point there, that's going to be a key component of this transition plan.
Right, I'm just trying to
key
figure
element, I
out how they come up with 23 people. I think there's probably, 17 or 18 that can retire.
So,
Is that a correct statement?
Well, 17 that would be if there's 40 now and they're talking about retaining 23, that would be 17 that would have to be a part of this transition plan. Whether the actual number is 23 or what the number is, this was a discussion that came up at PUAB. What is the exact number? And that is to be determined. I'm just using the number that was recommended in the Energy Master Plan that Burns and Mac did. Whether that's exactly right or not, we'll find out.
So, Mr. City Manager, a couple of years ago, we did a succession planning study looking at our entire workforce. I mean, we know, like most businesses in our country, we have an aging workforce. We have a lot of people who are approaching retirement. We took that information and started to make some strategic hires as they became available, in anticipation that some of our experienced leadership was going to be eligible for retirement. And I don't know if you can recall sort of off the top of your head, but that was, a fairly large percentage of our workforce across the board falls into that category.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact percent, but I know it exceeded 50% by the time you moved across all the different stages of retirement eligibilities.
And clearly people have varying plans about their retirement, being eligible for retirement and really having intent to retire can be two different things. I think, my concern is certainly, taking care of the people who've put in years of service to the city, without question, vitally important. But also vitally important is making sure that we're efficient with the workforce that we have, and that we retain the positions that are truly essential to operations.
Right, and I mean, if you'll hearken back briefly to the presentation you just saw, I showed you a trend analysis of the general fund, but I think that would probably be applicable in some form or fashion to all of our city funds. We know that we need to be as cost efficient and effective with the limited public resources that we have, and so that is a big part of why we're in here tonight on this specific issue, because I mean it relates to an aspect of the organization and a rather large one, but I think in totality that's true of all portions of our operations.
Thank you.
Okay, so going on, the next part about when we're discussing next steps at Blue Valley is to talk about the idea of repurposing the Blue Valley facility after closure. The location, condition, size, and construction of Blue Valley suggest it would be a prime candidate for repurposing as opposed to dismantling. While remediation will be necessary after closure, some of this has already been done, including ash pond compliance and some other things, but the smokestack and old coal handling equipment, there will have to be some remediation to the site. But after that, we feel that it is really a good candidate for reuse by the city, or the site may prove to be of interest to others as well. We've already had people contact us informally asking what we're going to do with it, suggesting uses. I'm sure you've heard citizens suggest to you ideas all the way from a brewery to a waste to energy facility, so you've had all kinds of ideas have been thrown at you. So what we're saying is these need to be considered and figured out what is the future purpose of it, and that will be another critical decision point for the City Council. Ideally, repurposing should begin as soon after the closure as practicable. Accordingly, the City Manager recently retained Lynch Consulting Services to begin a preliminary assessment of repurposing options for presentation to the City Council, which will lead to a request for proposal process. The consultant is expected to have the initial assessment report completed by the end of this month. So now we'll turn from Blue Valley to the 6 combustion turbines. Again, how did we get where we're at? Well, in addition to evaluating Blue Valley, the 2018 Energy Master Plan also looked at the 6 combustion turbines. In that report, Burns and McDonald determined that the city's best option, at least in the near term, is to continue to operate the existing CTs. But then in 2019, as we mentioned already, the city issued a power supply RFP, which resulted in the Oneta contract. But part of that process also did some updated market research for selling energy that you produce, and so they need to throw that into the 2018 plan to try to update it. So earlier this summer, I asked city staff to revisit the 2018 Burns and Mack study in light of the new market information obtained in 2019. And the results of that analysis, which I provided to the council, indicate that the city's best option is to continue to operate the existing turbines at least for the next few years. We know they're not going to last forever, but this was their recommendation. When you start talking about current status, the CTs date back to the 1960s and 70s. They are nearing the end of their useful lives, but as the report mentioned, they've been really well maintained by IPL staff. Despite their age, they can be expected to last a few more years, depending on the maintenance and replacement of components. They could last several more years if you were really wanting to reinvest in them. But again, they are pretty old and they're nearing the end of their useful life. But these units are called upon frequently by the Southwest Power Pool, and the 6 CTs, whether they're called upon or not, they provide a considerable amount of the capacity required by SPP, 93 megawatts. This compares to 45 megawatts that was replaced at Blue Valley through the Onetta contract. So this is a pretty big deal. So this is another huge decision point for the City Council. The cost to replace these CTs would be significant, considering that the 45 megawatts at Blue Valley cost $13.6 million. So you can see that replacing 93 megawatts is going to cost a lot more. You'd be tempted to say it'd be twice as much, but it'll be more than that, though, because there'll also be transmission upgrade costs to it to be added to that total. So it's going to be a pretty significant amount of money. So next steps. A major decision point for the City Council will be to establish a timeline for these CTs, including how long they should continue in service and when they should be replaced with other sources of capacity. IPL should use this grace period while the CTs are still in use to stabilize our finances and prepare for the financial impact of replacing the CTs. The city should continue to monitor the condition and performance of those CTs, as well as the relative costs and benefits of various options for replacing CT capacity, and a plan for replacement of the CTs, including a financial component, should be developed for future council consideration. So that concludes this presentation about a little update on production, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take a stab at answering them.
I have a question. This was presented to the PUAB.
Yes.
What was their recommendation?
Well, there was an accompanying resolution that was a draft resolution that's going to be, as Zach mentioned, is going to be before the City Council, and they voted to endorse that that resolution that when it comes before the council, and that which was to close Blue Valley, and they instead go with the June 1st, 2020 date for doing so.
Madam Mayor, if I may add to that, as Mark said, there's the resolution, which will be on next Monday night, sets a closure date of by June 1, 2020. It directs us to, as we anticipate getting the consultant report by the end of the month, issuing, following the issuance of the report, getting the RFP out on the street to get some ideas about future reuse options for Blue Valley. What I think, and I'm going to be very pointed about this, what we still lack some definition and clarity on, and I think the conversation at PUAB touched on this a little bit, but which aspects of that function are we retaining, which are we not? Because as you saw a couple slides ago, if we decide to keep CTs, if we continue reinvesting in that, that requires a certain number of employees. If we pack it up and move out of town.
So the PUAB did not give a recommendation on what to do with the CTs.
I'm going to defer to Mark to clarify.
Well, they basically, very similar to what was in this presentation, that you need to come up with a plan for replacing the CTs, and that you have to come up with a time frame of it. And I'm not saying you have to do that tonight, but I mean, this is the direction we have to go. We have to start talking about a planned replacement of them, and then you have to decide what capacity you want to replace it with.
There's 6 of them. They're not all going to stop working on the same day.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, I think we do need to have a better understanding of, you know, the age and what we anticipate to be the useful life of each one of them, because they're all going to, I mean, I certainly think that we should continue to use them as long as they're functioning. I don't know how much, I mean, I know we're talking about millions of dollars, but every time this council considers components or maintenance of those CTs, it's a big price tag as well. So there does become a point of that, you know, what is your return on investment for how much longer can you use them? And we can't predict that. I mean, they could stop working tomorrow or become unsafe to operate tomorrow. So I do think that we and, you know, perhaps the PUAB needs to see, look at those individually as we talk about all 6, you know, as one group, but they weren't all bought on the same day. They don't all, you know, they don't all operate on the same schedule, I presume. So I think some more information is needed on that. In my mind, when the decision was made to purchase from Oneta, there's a presumption that that would be the closure of, or the ceasing of production at Blue Valley would coincide with that. If the staff needs official direction from the council, I mean, I don't think that we should give ourselves an overnight to make that transition. I mean, if we need to find out from our professional staff is when those things can happen. I mean, can we turn off and start on, on the same day, or, what does that transition period look like? But I think, I mean, as I said, I think that in my mind, the presumption was we would close in, in the time, we don't need both. So when we start receiving power, receiving from Oneta, we can stop production.
Correct.
I do have another question. I know just as I'm thinking about it, because it relates to the previous presentation regarding opportunity for development in the valley. We heard that, and the potential adaptive reuses of the Blue Valley facilities. Does, Mr. City Manager, do you anticipate, I mean, does the stack stay? Does the stack go away? I mean, there would certainly be some environmental remediation that we can expect to happen with the stack. I presume the coal chute would leave. The ash pond has already been essentially capped. I don't think any of us expect that you can build on top of that. But if people are maybe turned off by the appearance of this power plant, if we're talking about some kind of mixed-use development in that area, does the appearance of the facility significantly change, or would that be determined by the reuse?
And Mark can clarify beyond this, but generally speaking, there is a minimum level of regulatory compliance that would need to happen with a decommissioning. There'd be some dismantling that needs to occur, so the coal chutes, the stack, some of those things need to be assessed and evaluated. But generally speaking, those are functions and aspects that would need to come down.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
So just out of curiosity, as I'm sitting here thinking, to have a power plant, we have to hold these special permits from the federal government
Right.
and the state and such. If we decommission this, do we still hold those permits? How do those permits play in that kind of environment?
That's a great question. I know you've talked about that before, and I think that is that's a great point. And yes, we did a little research, and there is value in the permits, which has been mentioned before. And you can look at that. It's like, first, what is the cost to get a new permit, and then you also have what's the likelihood of getting another permit. So I think the cost of getting a new permit like that would be, they think it might be $350,000 or more. The ability to get one might be even more difficult than the cost. But so there might be value when you're weighing all these things and taking all this into account. There might be some value to the idea of considering it mothballed as opposed to just totally decommissioning it, in a sense. I mean, you might try to maintain that permit if you can. And there might be some ways that can be done. It has been mentioned that one of the options, it wasn't one of the options that Burns Mac liked particularly, but the idea of replacing CTs with large reciprocating engines, it's an expensive thing, but so if you put reciprocating engines there, obviously it's still in a production sense. Energy storage is another one. You could have energy storage there, which would, number one, it could help you get more accreditation for the solar, and it would also help you in other ways. That might also be true. But there may be some other ideas that can be used that we could try to maintain that permit in case you did need to you don't want to surrender an asset until you know you're sure you're never going to want to get it again. But that's part of this whole process. You need to determine that. And if you think that you are sure you don't want it, and that your new reuse is important enough to go that route, then you might decide it's not worth trying to maintain that permit because this reuse idea is so good. So we just don't know that yet, and that's why we're going to get this report back, which is just going to identify options. It's going to list a dozen different potential reuse options. And then you're going to have a conversation about which ones you like, which are feasible, and then we do a request for proposals to try to find out who out there wants to do some of these things.
Is there permitting for storage, obviously production? Do we have to have a special use permit for storage if batteries become?
My understanding, I mean, we haven't really looked into them all, so I hesitate to give an answer that I only have halfway researched that, but I do not believe that it would be a problem if you did want to do storage, battery storage there. But again, we haven't really researched these out yet. We just we've been identifying, you have. I know you've heard lots of different ideas, so we've just been thinking about a lot of different options, and that's why we really need to get somebody else in here from the outside to come in and really give us do some research and what are some of the options that are out there, and then give it to you, and then your hard work is going to start when you're going to start thinking about these options.
Fair enough.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Just a few comments. There is a considerable amount of information in the Burns and Mack study on the CTs. In fact, I remember talking with them at length about the 6 CTs at our substations. I think really one of the conversations that we need to start with is, do we want to continue producing energy? Because if we do, then we obviously want to continue using those CTs at least probably for a few years, as Burns and McDonald have already recommended as a transition. And if we do that, if we continue to operate CTs even into the foreseeable future and even potentially replace some of those, then I would think we would not want to get rid of the Blue Valley facility. We can mothball it. We can get rid of some of the asbestos, other contamination, but the value of the federal license to operate a power plant is one of those things that it's not even hardly possible to get one anymore. And we own it. We own that license to operate, even if the turbines are not running. Even if we sell the turbines, and that was an option that Burns and Mack said as well, that it may be an opportunity to sell those old ones for parts. So I think the opportunity for us to continue to use Blue Valley and keep that federal license for the time being, we may eventually want to replace 2 of the combustion turbines, the 2 that Burns and Mack said were in the poorest condition.
The J units.
Yeah, the J units
are outliers in performance.
And I believe they're both fuel oil units, if I remember right.
Yes,
so those are the 2 that are the most expensive to repair, to run, and the fuel oil is the most expensive resource to buy as well. So I would think that we would hopefully consider keeping the Blue Valley facility in city ownership, at least for the next 2 to 4 years while this transition takes place, and to see what opens up with battery storage. That potentially could be something that we could use some of that facility for as well. We own and have the ash ponds that we paid $6 million to cap, and that's acres and acres behind that building. And we have to monitor that according to DNR and EPA. So those continue to be our liability and continue to be our responsibility. Everything's in compliance. There's no problem with those. I don't see any foreseeable problem in 20 or 30 years with those. But it's not developable. That land cannot be used for anything else. So the recommendations for the existing turbines, the existing CTs, I mean, that's part of what we need to discuss and decide, the direction we want to go if we're going to continue to produce any energy as far as IPL. And if we are, then we need to look in the future, 2, 3, 4 years, are we going to start to replace 2 of the turbines? If we are we going to put them back out at the substations, or are we going to put them at the Blue Valley plant where they could be sheltered and monitored and maintenance done quicker, easier, and cheaper in one place? All the hookups are there. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options if we own that facility. And I think we need to look at these options, have Burns and Mac or some other group that has already gotten the data. They've already looked at all this for us. Come back and look at some of those options. But I think the council needs to decide, are we going to continue to produce any energy? Personally, I think there's some value into keeping some of the CTs. And that's why I think for the time being and for the efficiency and the financial end of it, we need to keep the Blue Valley building and plant out there, even though some of that may change if we mothball it. So, thanks.
Well, the thing I would just add is that I think that the financial component, that's like one of the legs of the stool that hasn't gotten maybe as much attention compared to the rates and reliability. We now have the rates where we're low residentially, we're the lowest rate. We have the best reliability. Commercial, we still have higher rate than we want to be, as you learned earlier today. So we have plans for new efficiencies, new income from economic development, from a new FERC filing, and Blue Valley closure will net us some new revenue. So we have some light at the end of the tunnel on the financial side of things. We just need to make sure it all comes together so that we do the right thing and try to hit all your objectives that you have as far as the sustainable finances, reliability, good service, and everything that you want.
Yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yep.
I have a few problems with these CTs. I don't think that we should be sitting around very long. We did the one last year, just in the inspection on it was $2 million alone. They're 45 years old. In the statement right here, it says they've seen their life, just like Blue Valley, but yet we come down the road here and it says, oh, we can keep them 10 years, maybe 20 years. I mean, now you're saying we ran them harder than we ever have. We made a whole $350,000, and then you have 400 up here, but my paperwork says 350. Have a lot of liability out there.
That wasn't the CTs, though. That wasn't the CTs. He's talking about
Blue Valley. No, that wasn't. That was just Blue Valley.
It says combined on this.
I updated that one since the first time when this was going to come to council about a month ago or so. But no, that's just Blue Valley. But no, your point is 100% right about you don't have, they're not a long-term solution. It's a matter of they have to be replaced and when and how. That's the whole question.
How much is a bore scope? It says every 2 years on here. I know the inspections are every 5. We just did one. So every 5 years, we're gonna have another one, or we're gonna have to keep rolling them.
Yeah, we just did that on that whole, like you said, it was $2 million for one of the H units. I mean, we had a breakdown of one of the units that was, I think, was almost $200,000 repair. I mean, it's going, and like you said, especially like some of the units are not that great. The H and I units, though, are called upon. They're pretty good. They're pretty efficient. They make money when they run. But again, even though they're not going to last forever, that's why I say
The cost of maintenance is so astronomical. That, I mean, as
You spend a turbine, then you're talking tenfold that.
So the point we're just trying to make is that I think the report is to be taken, the way I take it is, we have a little time to do it right, but we have to do something.
We need to make
You
it-
can't just keep going
I'm
for another
100%
40 years.
behind that.
So
But-
I think that's what we're trying to say is, thank goodness they aren't going to break tomorrow, or at least 4 of them are not likely to.
We don't
I mean,
know.
no.
Better
they're-
find some wood to knock on.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey,
So I think we agree on that's, you don't have to do it tomorrow, but you're going to have to come with a plan pretty fast.
Yeah, see through here that we went through, we was talking about keeping them in operation for 10 years at 46 million, going to Aetna or Oneida for 52, brand new 76 million. The thing about the first one, in the first two, is in 10 years we still have nothing.
Right.
You spend all the money in the world, in 10 years we have nothing. We just signed a deal with Oneida for 10 years of capacity. So in 10 years, boy, it's going to be a rude awakening for this council who's up here. I'm sure I'm not going to be, but somebody's going to have a lot of money to be spending here to get this thing out. I think that we need to figure out as a council, do one of these now. start getting this on a roll. Prices are not getting cheaper, they're going up. Another thing that I see missing in here above all this, and it was done at the PUAB on July 18th, is when PUAB made a move that requested the city manager to assign necessary resources to perform investigation, analysis, and continued use of these existing combustion turbines. The analysis would compare the net present value of continuing to own and maintaining our current inventory of aged combustion turbines. The analysis should consider the costs related to currently planned requiring staffing of 23 employees plus administration personnel versus purchasing the equal quantity of energy with black start capacity. So we have not, in all this paperwork, we haven't seen whether maybe we should go out and buy some energy. This is all this kind of thing. Blue sky is what I call that. The only one that makes any sense is buying these receptacle units, or we go out and buy some energy.
Well, the report on the CTs was done in 18 and updated in 19. So we have done a analysis, but like what they're just saying is that they're going to work for a while. They're not a long-term solution. We have to figure it out. You really have exactly the same debate that you had with the Blue Valley Oneta.
Yes.
And it's going to come down to what value do you place on on-site generation versus off-site generation? Where does cost compare to other policy considerations like that? So you're going to be faced with the exact same debate. And all this presentation is trying to do is make you aware of it, and you can be thinking about it. This is your decision points you've got coming up that really we have to do. So I would actually, I think this is what we have to do. Come up with this timeline for replacement, and we need to make you aware of options available to you and decide which option you want and when you want to do it.
Well, you know, we've kicked the can down the road on Blue Valley for so long, and then all of our rates went up. We're doing the same thing with this. We're kicking the can down the road. We're throwing money at nothing. It's still an old tin can out there. And I think this council needs to move forward and try to figure out a solution for this. I know we have some time, I agree, you know, but I think that we need to shoot a deadline down there too for that.
Councilman?
So, on site, Blue Valley and the generation of the turbines would represent how much? 3%?
Well, they represented, about 130 megawatts out of 300 something.
What it needs for SPP.
Right.
But our contracts is what gives to SPP with other people, like our contract with Dogwood, it goes into there. Our contract with Oneta goes into there, right? And then they give us. Our on-site capacity, well, not capacity, generation.
See, and that's where it's kind of, when people have used this number before saying that it only produces 2% of our energy needs, it's really, that's neither here nor there, because we get all of our energy needs from SPP. We just have to provide
So
the capacity
the 350 that you've made, we didn't have to do. They did it as a, let's make money.
Right.
Because it's going away.
Right.
Okay, let's use it up and
Correct.
make sure, because there might be something there left.
Right.
But we know from the programs that have come to us, the studies, that it isn't going to last.
Right.
And we know that from the studies that the turbines aren't going to last.
Right.
And we're going through the same scenario again. We don't produce.
Right.
There's no need for us to produce.
Right.
Thank you.
So we could look at a ton of different options. We need to look at, and we've presented with a lot of options, but we got to make a decision. I mean, it's come to a point where the decisions that we have made require us to, really choose which option we want moving forward. I mean, our employees are depending upon us to do that. Our citizens are depending upon us to do that. So you know, these decisions need to be made before the end of the year. I mean, we need to, you know, stop looking, I mean, obviously consider the professional recommendations that we've paid for from Burns and McDonald and these other consultants. But, you know, it's time for us to, and if that is going to require us to have some additional meetings and presentations, then we need to do that. But, you know, it's really come time where we need to give direction and move forward.
And I feel like the financial component is really the key one here, because they'll continue to operate for a while. You're committed to, you want to replace them. You know, financially, you have to really look at what is our ability to finance.
Yes.
You know,
but we also need, as we also have heard, you know, through our presentations this evening, that we need to look beyond, you know, our terms on this, or how, you know, our terms on this council, and not just create a problem for somebody 10 years down the road. So I think that that is very important as well.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So I have a question about the resolution that's on for next Monday night. So the resolution that's coming to us says that we are going to close Blue
Which
Valley.
we have not seen.
Which we have not seen it. So it is to close Blue Valley June 1st. And is
By June 1st.
by June 1st. And is the transition plan part of that resolution as well?
There's some direction to us to develop a transition plan.
Okay, so I am in favor of doing that. I think the whole plan needs to come together, and we don't want to be paying double for energy. And so overlapping it very much, it's going to be a lot more expensive for the city. Burns and Mac had already laid out a lot of the expenses with the different options. In fact, I have a stack of papers this high of options. There's so many, I can't even read them all.
Yeah.
There's so many options. But I'm going to liken this to driving a used car, a 25-year-old used car that you know is starting to break down. There's a lot of repairs. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into that car, and so we have a decision. We either can buy a new car, we can get rid of that 25-year-old car and take out a lease payment, and buy all of our energy online. Through SPP, or we can buy some expensive new car, new turbines, put them in there. Burns and Mac has recommended that we drive that old car for another 2 to 3 years at least, while we transition and get the financial stability for IPL and the city finances too, by the way, the general fund, because that needs to be stabilized as well. And so, yes, something needs to be decided. But in my opinion, we need to drive that 25-year-old car for another few years. And it may be that in a few years, none of us will be on here to make that decision, but we will have guided.
Yeah, but not 10 or 20.
Pardon?
I mean, and not 10 or 10 or 20 years.
I don't think that
And-
option was a good option. Their recommendation, their
And
best
how much are we
and
going?
cheapest.
How much are we going to spend in inspecting and I mean, that's why I'd like to look at each one of these 6. You know, let's age them each. When are they due for maintenance?
Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at what expense? I mean, run them for 2 or 3 more years at $5, you know, to $10 million. You know, put that into maintenance of something that isn't going to last more than 2 or 3 years, and we could wake up tomorrow and it is not safe to operate.
But if we buy new reciprocating engines for $150 million, what are the bond payments on that too?
Well,
And can we afford bond payments through IPL?
There's a history already of how much the maintenance is. The data's there.
Right.
It's not a mystery.
Right.
We know, we've been told, just as we were told on Blue Valley, it's going to be it's not going to be economically feasible to maintain these. Can't be done. Shouldn't be done.
No, not for 20 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right,
Anything else?
thank you.
Okay. Next is Mr. City Manager, deferred street maintenance financing.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, in 2017, we presented this body with a deferred maintenance report that estimated pretty close to $1 billion in deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance, of course, is not defined as new projects or redevelopment, but rather is defined as projects that we know we need to invest in existing infrastructure, things like replacement of bridges, repairs of streets, sidewalks, et cetera. So tonight, we have a program for you that was first presented to you as part of our submitted budget. In that program, we are proposing using our street sales tax to make a significant investment and putting a dent in that $1 billion of deferred maintenance. So our Public Works Director, Tim Gramling, is going to review that with you and get some initial feedback from you. Thank you.
That's all I was going to say. Everything.
All right, let's go home.
Yeah, and I know it's been a long meeting already, and I know it probably didn't want to think about ending it by talking about deferred maintenance, but hopefully this is going to be some exciting enough plans that when we get through this, we'll end on an up note.
Tim, you take your time.
Huh?
Take your time.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe, but, so the purpose of tonight's presentation is to talk about a proposal that we put together to accelerate street maintenance by financing through the street sales tax as a way to begin to address this deferred maintenance backlog that the city has experienced. So I'm going to talk about some programs that we're going to finance in order to accomplish the reduction in this backlog within the next 3 to 5 years. So we'll be looking at, and we'll also be looking for some direction from the council to see if this is a plan we want to proceed with. So as Zach mentioned, the report that was done in February 2017 that indicated there was a significant amount of deferred maintenance citywide. Of that, $27.5 million of that was for street maintenance alone. Also, if you might remember, the last 2 citizen satisfaction surveys that have been done in 2016 and 2018, both done by the citizens, indicated that street maintenance was the #1 priority that the city should invest in going forward. There are also several objectives in the Independence for All strategic plan that are related to addressing street maintenance as well. So all this led to the recommendation that Zach talked about in this year's budget of addressing deferred maintenance and doing this plan for financing this in order to make a significant impact to infrastructure. So, like Zach mentioned in the first presentation, that Independence for All is a driver, and it has driven a lot of what I put in this proposal tonight, and it was considered in the development of each of the programs that we're going to use to try to accomplish this. So what are we talking about? So we've developed a plan to finance street maintenance programs for $15 million over the next 15 years. Excuse me. So why $15 million for 15 years? It's basically what the street sales tax can support in order to remain viable. In order for that to be successful without affecting other maintenance programs such as the overlay program, we plan to use the current annual expenditures to be used to carry out the programs that I'll talk about in a little bit that we do as we do now, which is on a pay-as-you-go basis, and use those amounts to make an annual debt service payment to do that same work, but instead of doing it over the next 10 to 15, maybe 20 years, we'll be doing that amount of work over the next 3 to 5 years. So what we want to focus on as far as the maintenance programs in this financing plan would be to address bridges, curbs and gutters, sidewalks, safety improvements, and intersections. There's a second part to this plan as well, and that's to finance some deferred maintenance for our equipment, for some of the equipment that we use, and to replace some of that equipment for $2.8 million over the next 10 years. Again, the same idea would be the amount of money that we're using to replace 1 or 2 pieces of equipment now over the next several years to replace a significant number of those pieces of equipment up front now. And the focus on this would be on our snow operation fleet. So the first program that I wanted to kind of outline was the one with bridges. This is probably one of the most significant ones. The city has about 69 bridges that are on they're on non-state system, but we actually get them inspected by MoDOT every 3 years, and they provide the city with this report. And the report specifies the condition assessment that has been done, and then makes recommendations for each bridge that they inspect. The most recent one that we got from MoDOT was in July of this year. Of the 69 bridges that they inspected, 51 of these have been identified as needing some level of maintenance, and in some case needing major repairs or even replacement. There's additional bridges also that aren't on aren't included in the ones that MoDOT inspect that we're also want to take a look at as well, and that also need some level of maintenance and repair. So what we would propose to do as part of this would be, first of all, to develop a plan, or like a CIP, if you will, just for bridges, where we would go out and look at every single bridge, do a scope for each one of those to develop what specifically needs to be done as far as maintenance or repairs, put them on a schedule and make a budget for those, and then proceed. But we would be doing that on as an accelerated basis as we could, so hopefully we'll be addressing most of those within the next 3 to 5 years. And what's the advantage of this? Well, we've seen in a couple of places in the city where we've actually had to close streets because we've come across some structures that we felt like were not safe enough for the public to travel over. But we had no plan to address these because we hadn't done any kind of inspection. We hadn't done any kind of program to anticipate that. So we had to close that road because of safety reasons, and then we had to go out and do the preliminary engineering work, the survey work, and then the design work, and then to get that project ready to bid out, and then keep it closed while we did the construction. What we want to do here is to do a lot of that upfront work first. So we want to look at all of these bridges, develop the plans, do the design, and then only close the road when we're actually ready to do the construction. And hopefully that'll help avoid then and minimize the disruption to the public by doing it that way. Here's a list of, these are the 51 bridges that were part of the MoDOT inspections that we were provided in the most recent report. This is basically our starting point for the bridge program. And then what we want to do is develop a full scope of what will be done to each one of these bridges going forward. Here you can see this bridge on the left, or this is actually the same bridge. On the left is the surface or the deck of that bridge. This is the one at Chrysler and Winter in Lexington. You can see the deck has a significant number of surface patching throughout there. But on the right, if you can look underneath and see the little white lines that are on the underneath side of that deck, those are actually cracks in the deck. That makes this structure in pretty significant condition for need of major repairs. So that they basically recommended that one that needs a deck replacement.
Tim, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So that one is a BNSF. It's over a railroad.
Right.
There's several of them over railroads.
Right.
Is there any liability for us with the railroad, and is there any help from the railroad in replacing some of those?
No, because these are actually our roads over the railroad. So yeah, we would have to coordinate with them, but.
Is there any liability for us? with the
No,
railroad?
there's not. Not as long as we coordinate with them and follow their guidelines. So another program would be curb and gutter. About 3 years ago, we did a pavement management system, and was mainly for the streets to develop condition assessments of all of our streets and help us to use that is to develop our programs for addressing street maintenance going forward. But also part of that, we had the condition of all the curbs and gutters and sidewalks done as part of that study as well. And we received a condition rating for all the curbs and gutters throughout the city. And that identified more than 50,000 feet of curbs and guttering that was identified as being in poor condition. Now the good news for that is that that's less than 2% of all the curbs and gutters in the city. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but that 50,000 feet is actually still a pretty significant amount of work. It represents probably about in the neighborhood of about $2 million worth of work. So with the current street sales tax on a pay-as-you-go basis, we're only really able to support about $150,000 a year. That would take about 15 years to address just this 50,000 feet, which means over that time we're doing that, other curb and gutter is getting in bad condition, and we basically never catch up with it. So the idea here would be to do this 50,000 feet as quickly as possible so that once we get that done, then we'll be able to continue to address the rest of the curb and gutter system, you know, on that pay-as-you-go system, or pay-as-you-go method. And I should say, too, that in this program, we'd be addressing curbs and gutters as a project in and of themselves. So we'd have a project where we'd just go out and fix curbs and gutters, but also a lot of our street programs, such as overlay and other street repair programs that we might be doing as part of other some of our other projects would also be addressing curbs and gutters if they were a part of that project as well. Here's a picture of a curb along Valley View Parkway. Pretty much crumbled to nothing. And this is in one of the most visible and high traffic areas of the city. So it's not only visible just to our citizens, but also to a lot of visitors as well. So this is one of the, wanting to improve the visual appearance of the city. Another program we want to look at is for sidewalks. The sidewalk program would focus on mostly ADA compliance and high need and high traffic connectivity for pedestrians, where we have a lot of pedestrians wanting to use sidewalks already. The city has had a policy for I'm not sure how long, for as long as I can, as long as I know, that it's been the property owner's responsibility to maintain sidewalks. We would continue to maintain that policy. The city couldn't really take on all of that maintenance, but what we want to primarily focus on with this particular program would be to address numerous areas of existing sidewalks that have already had small gaps in the vicinity of existing sidewalks. So a lot of longer sections of new sidewalks would really kind of be out of the scope of this program. And we would also want to address existing sidewalks that are in need of repair. So also where there's short sections of sidewalks that are in bad condition, that where the condition is actually challenging people being able to use it, is actually affecting connectivity as well. So we'd like to address those in addition to that.
Mayor, if I can interrupt.
Yeah.
So Tim, along with the City of Independence position regarding sidewalk and maintenance thereof, is that not the position for most municipalities round about us?
For yeah, the majority of communities, I say majority, it's maybe 60% of the communities in the metro area have the same policy that the City of Independence does. So.
Thank you.
Here's an example of what we're talking about. This is at Lee Summit and Truman Road, where you have sidewalks on Lee Summit, both north and south, and then you have sidewalks on Truman going west, but for some reason there's a gap right before you get to Lee Summit. And this is in an area where there's a significant number of people living in neighborhoods just to the north here, and several transit stops to the west. And we want to address these small areas where there's existing sidewalk now. So the difficulty of putting in the sidewalks is relatively low, since there's already sidewalks there, there's curbs and gutters, those types of things. So the complexity of putting in these types of sidewalks in these small sections like this is relatively easy. And a little lower cost. Here's another location where it's actually right next to a place where we actually propose to put a new transit stop as part of another project that we will be bidding out probably within the next month or so. But it makes sense to not have an area that leaves a 200-foot gap to the nearest sidewalk to get to that transit stop. So this would be another type of location where we would be looking at targeting. This is at Partridge and Nolan. So knowing that we're not going to be able to do all sidewalks, we felt like it would be critical to develop some criteria on how we're going to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to prioritize it. And so here's the criteria that we're looking at. So ADA compliance has to be first and foremost on the list of that, because anytime you do anything to sidewalks, you have to meet that compliance no matter what you do. We also look at the accident history involving pedestrians to address safety. We want to make sure that we're connecting places where there are gaps, either due to missing sections of sidewalks or in need of repair, again, in high pedestrian areas. We want to see what activity centers are needing to be accessed, such as shopping areas, community centers, transit facilities, those types of things. And then we're going to be rating basically the kind of complexity and feasibility of the sidewalks. If there are difficulties with drainage or terrain, or if there's a high impact to adjacent property, you need a lot of right-of-way, those types of things would be the kind of thing we would probably have to shy away from. Another program that we want to address with this is intersections. And what we're looking at here is focusing on intersections where our maintenance crews have to spend a significant amount of time going back to do repairs at the same intersections over and over again. So helping to reduce the burden on those. Just lost my connectivity. I am the first one that did that in the middle of my presentation. I bored it to death.
Tim, while we're waiting, how are you going to decide, like, let's say you do the $15 million. How do you decide how much of that $15 million is going to go towards bridges, which to me is more important than curbs, or sidewalks? Sidewalks to me are more important than curbs. I mean, how are you going to do that?
We're going to look at the amount of work that's going to take for each one of those and develop the program around, by doing those bridge assessments that I'm talking about, we're going to have a budget developed for each bridge. And then putting all those together, we'll develop an overall budget for that bridge program.
Okay, of the 15 million, and then whatever's left going to go to sidewalks?
We'll do the same thing for sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. We'll go out and put these programs together, estimate it based on the number of locations that we know where we want to do the work.
Okay, we're looking at a total of 15 million. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes.
So 5, and 5, or?
No, we have a general idea of what they're going to cost. So it's not an exact amount. So, it would be something in the neighborhood of $5 million for bridges, maybe about 1.5 to 1.75 million for each for curbs and gutters and sidewalks. Let's see, the other program is intersections. So probably another 4 million for intersections. And then for safety improvements, we have a couple of safety improvements that we want to do as part of that as well for a couple $1 million. So, we've kind of have a preliminary idea, but we haven't actually gone out and fully developed these scopes. So those amounts, those are a general idea of what we know we're talking about, but those would vary a little bit within those.
And so will you come back to us and say, okay, with the bridges, we need $7 million?
We'll be coming back to you as we develop the projects that are going to be done within that. So let's say I've got one bridge and I'm going to replace for $1.5 million. That'll be a single contract. That'll come to you like every other project does. So, we won't.
Okay, are we going to have a global view of the 15 million? I guess that's my real question.
Councilwoman DeLucy, I'll help Tim here. Generally speaking, what we probably anticipate doing is after tonight, so this is kind of the first peek behind the curtain, get any additional feedback, come back to you guys with a final resolution that, again, high level, here's kind of the amount in each of those categories. And then, as Tim just mentioned, every one of these projects will have to be publicly bid and then voted on and approved by the council. But before we get to those individual grains of sand, there will be a resolution that puts the parameters of where we will be investing, correct?
Thank you.
And one thing that, the $15 million is, that, and then what we have for the equipment is we're not going to be able to ask for much more than that because, like I said, the sales tax really can't support much more than that. So as far as the intersection program, like I said, we're trying to address high maintenance intersections. We want to replace what we've done, kind of similar to what we've done for a few of these in the past couple of years. We're going to replace the existing pavement full depth with some high strength asphalt. Intersections tend to be, the ones we're looking at tend to be at locations where there's traffic signals or stop signs, that type of thing, where there's stopping and starting, usually heavier traffic. So those intersections take a little bit more of a beating than the normal street does. So you have to have something that can withstand that extra load. Concrete typically was something that did that better, but in the recent years, the asphalt industry has developed a higher strength asphalt that actually performs very well, compares with concrete in terms of that. And that's what we've kind of started using, and we've seen some good results so far. So you've probably noticed in the past, maybe some intersections that kind of had some ripples as you were coming up. Right. That was one of the reasons why people were getting away from asphalt at intersections, but like I said, in the last couple of years, they've really developed some better mixes to withstand some of that. So, and it's a little more affordable too, so that's why we're going with that. And then, of course, anytime we do intersections or any other projects, we have to address the pedestrian ADA requirements. Here's kind of our starting point for the intersections. The ones that we want to start taking a look, first ones we want to tackle over the next 2 to 3 years. Here's a location that we've done recently, actually done just a couple of months ago. This is 39th and Blue Ridge. You can see what it looked like on the left and then what it looked like when we're done. And this is what we intend to do on all of these intersections. Here's one of the first ones we want to get to is Chrysler between 43rd and 40 Highway. It's one that's in pretty severe condition right now. And another one real close to us here at Nolan and Truman Road. This is one that when I remember when I first came to Independence about 4.5 years ago, didn't look to be in too bad of a condition. And I thought when we started looking at maybe wanting to address some of these, I thought, well, it'll be a while before we get to that one. But after last winter, this one kind of moved to the top, and it's kind of disintegrating fairly quickly now. So we want to get to that one as well. So the other part of this financing plan that we put together would be to finance some equipment and doing the same thing, addressing deferred maintenance on our equipment, primarily focusing on snow equipment. In particular, we want to replace 11 snow trucks. That's about half of the fleet that we have for our snow operations right now. These trucks average about 20 to 25 years old. Most of them are in need of repair almost on a continual basis. And in some cases, we actually have mechanics that have to fabricate parts for them just to keep them on the road because they're so old and we can't get what we need to normal parts to keep them on the road. So, and then we also want to replace our salt brine equipment. This is something that salt brine is actually becoming more a regular part of our snow operations, and we're finding other ways to use it other than just pre-treatment. We found out last year with the number of storms that we had, we have to have something that can generate much more quantity of brine because, you know, when you have those storms like that, you've got to be able to recover from those quickly and then have enough to go back out and address the storm, and then some equipment that we can actually put it out at a faster rate as well. So with those things, we think we would improve snow operations significantly and as a result, improve the level of service to the citizens. One of the biggest factors, though, that we want to take into account when you're using this kind of equipment, especially that's this old and this kind of condition that's constant need of repairs, and you're also using it in a very harsh way, so out doing snow removal with salt and all that kind of stuff just puts even more stress and strain on already bad equipment. There's a safety factor as well that we're concerned about with our drivers and the public, and we want to take that out of the equation by getting these replaced. And the biggest benefit would actually be that even though we'd be borrowing money to pay for this equipment, we'd be paying interest on it, we actually would pay less in interest than we are in the maintenance cost right now. So it would actually be an overall savings by doing this. Here's some of our nice equipment that we have to deal with right now.
Holes on the side of them.
And there's some more, and I should have mentioned too that in this picture you can see the plow and then the spreader that's in the bed of that truck. That equipment would be included with these purchases as well. So it's not just the trucks themselves. So we wanted to show this financing schedule. Some of this process has already been happening because we had to gather information to know whether this program was feasible or not. But you can see the last line in that. Before we would move forward, we would be bringing the approval of the lease purchase agreement to the City Council. We're shooting for that on December the 2nd. And then the next slide is looking at the forecast. This is kind of within the street sales tax. We wanted to show that the feasibility of the plan has been considered and that it is reasonable and it's sustainable over the period of time that we're looking at. Also, we kind of wanted to mention that we did have presented this to a couple of committees with the city, and the Honor Roll Committee on November the 4th and the Street Oversight Committee recently, and both committees did endorse this plan. And then just to let you know, I mean, some of the future action that the council will take related to this, I think we've kind of already mentioned it, the lease purchase.
Sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put that at the top of the list, please?
Yes.
Yeah, as I said, that's something that's probably outside the scope of this program, but we are looking at some other ways to try to get that funded. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I had a couple things. Since we've had an early winter and we didn't get last year's cleaned up very good, I just kind of question the quality of our asphalt, number one, if we need to increase that so we have better. And then of course, I mentioned in the roll-on committee about the slurry seal, some kind of sealant on there. Another thing, in the application on this asphalt, I mentioned this about a year ago, I believe, when we was having some issues with one of the contractors, but when they run the one row down there, and then when they come back to do the second one, they're not heating up that side, so we have a cold surface and a hot one, and they're not bonding together, and that's why we have all these rows that's got, right where the lines are, it's all crackled out and rattled out.
Yep,
I know that probably costs more money, but maybe we can get a few more years out of these streets.
yep. And by the way, we are addressing some of those that were done. I think a lot of the ones we're having the most trouble with, I think, were done in 2013. And we're supposed to be, the cold weather's kind of catching us a little bit. We were going to be coming back and doing a joint sealing on those to seal those up so they won't cause us any more problems, so, but yeah.
Anything else?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
looking at the bottom line here, looking at the numbers, so I'm assuming that we're going to be able to recoup quite a bit of savings in cost measures by having updated equipment, especially those trucks, that we can help offset some of this debt service. Is
Right.
that correct thinking?
Definitely,
here?
yes. I mean, we spend probably, on just these 11 trucks, if we didn't replace them all at once, and we did them kind of little over time over the next 10 years or so, we'd probably spend over $600,000 just in maintenance costs on keeping those on the road. The interest on this that we're looking at right now from the proposal we've seen is about $480,000, so there's a savings right there just from getting them replaced all at once. Plus also buying 11 of them now as opposed to a little over time, you saving that inflation as well, so there's another few $1,000s that you'd save. So yeah, it's definitely an overall savings. I mean, really, you don't normally see that in a lot of these things, especially for equipment, but that's just kind of an indication of how bad our fleet is right now, so.
You think you can figure out these combustion turbines?
That's a little out of my area.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Okay. Next, Mr. City Manager, is 24 Highway Overview.
Yep, back by popular command, Tim Gramling.
Yay!
And this is really exciting. So this is a project that has really come together over the past few weeks and months. It's kind of morphed into a possibility of a very significantly transformative project. What we want to do is give an overview of what the project is and the projects in this kind of general area are, and then go over how they got to where we are now, and then how these projects are related and how we're going to carry them out. So first of all, I'll talk about what we're calling the 24 Highway Cost Share Project, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we got here after this. But this project is considered a safety project in a high accident corridor. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert the existing 4-lane road into a 5-lane road that has a center 2-way left turn lane. Also, we're going to improve intersections along the entire corridor, mostly looking at the signalized intersections, so updating the signals, addressing radius, turn radiuses, and that type of thing. So that's where a lot of the accidents we're going. And then also, as part of this project, we're going to add the complete street element, which are put in there to address the pedestrian, the bicycle, the transit modes of transportation as well. So this project has really become a partnership between the city and MoDOT. MoDOT came to us probably at the end of last year and indicated to us that they had done a safety analysis in their whole district and said that 24 Highway from 291 to the west was their second highest rated accident corridor in their entire Kansas City district, which was a little bit of a surprise to us. Then we did a safety analysis or assessment with MoDOT staff and city staff where we actually sat down and talked about all of these, looked at all the number of accidents, types of accidents, actually went out onto the street and looked at some of the issues as well. And we pretty much agreed that the best way to address this safety need is the approach that we've talked about here. So what the city did was we applied for cost share funding to access, and we did this so that in order to access a certain amount of MoDOT funds that were readily available. So as a result, what we're looking at doing is kind of splitting this into 2 phases, making 2 projects out of it. The first phase would be from Missouri 291 to River Boulevard, and this enables us to use some previously received grant funding for that area. As far as part of the city's match for this 50-50 cost share. And then basically use the using the STP funding and the city's match, and then would basically provide that whole 50% match, and then MoDOT providing the other 50% match. and the design for what we were going to do for the design for this, and this would, for this phase one, would be to use an existing consultant that we actually already had into place, because we'd actually started one of those STP projects, one of those grant projects. We started the design on that last year, and then kind of put them on hold when MoDOT came to us with this idea. And so we're going to utilize this same consultant going forward and just kind of do an addendum to their agreement.
Who's that consultant, Tim?
It's Burns and Mac, Burns and McDonnell. And then in order to line up with when MoDOT has their funding that's going to be available, we need to do the construction in year 2021, 2022. Phase 2 of the project will be from River Road, or River Boulevard to Wilson Road. Again, it'll be a cost share type project, but it won't necessarily be a 50-50 split. It'll be what MoDOT refers to as a cost apportionment, which means we'll probably pay different percentages. Hopefully they'll pay a much higher percentage than we do. We've got to work that out. They have some safety money that's available, but it's not going to be available until 2023, 2024, which is why I've got on here that the construction would take place at that time. But we want to be able to take advantage of them offering those funds, and so we'll have to come up with our part as well once we decide how we're going to divide that up. So what I wanted to do now is it gets a little confusing with all the different projects that we've talked about that are going on centered kind of around 24 Highway. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what all's going on here and how we got to where we're at now. So as I said before, if you can see the green highlighted section kind of in the upper right part of the aerial photography there, you can see that is the original 24 Complete Streets project, STP project, that we got the first grant for. That grant was for $2 million, which was supposed to be available in 2020. That was only going to include improvements on the south side of 24 from 291 to Lee Summit. Then the next funding cycle for the STP, we put in an application for the Truman Connected project, and we received that grant. That was actually a $4.2 million grant, and then included a multimodal facility from the 40 Highway Sterling area going up to Inglewood, over to the square, and then up to the Truman Library. And then that section of purple that you can kind of see going east on 24 Highway was also part of the Truman Connected project originally. That was part of the $4.2 million grant. So what we did when MoDOT approached us about doing this project is we took that portion of Truman Connected, which was about a $1.5 million part of that 4.2, combined it with the original 24 Complete Streets project for the $2 million, and that's what makes up the phase 1 for this cost share project. So basically we're able to use funding that we were going to use anyway to do the exact same improvements we were going to do anyway, but get much more of a project because of the MoDOT funds that they can put into this. So really we're not spending any more than we were going to anyway, and we're getting the same thing that we were going to do, but address this safety issue as well. And it really could be, it's going to transform the area as well, because there's going to be a lot of improvements along there that have needed to be done. So, so the light blue part of Truman Connected that you see there, that's what remains of the Truman Connected project, and that's the other 2.7 million of the 4.2. So that project's still in the planning phase. And I did want to make a note here and stipulate that route is what I show on here is just representative. We're still actually determining the final route. So I just want to make sure that's clear. It could end up somewhere else, but right now it represents $2.7 million grant, and we are continuing with that. And then the red, excuse me? That's just the light blue part, yes, going. And then the red part going west on 24 goes from River to Wilson. That will be the phase 2 part of the 24 cost share project. And then you can see a gold star right in the middle of all that. That's where the 24 bridge project is, which is going on right now near the Truman Library. So that you can kind of see that's kind of the hub of all of this activity right now. So, so I hope that clarifies what's going on there. So again, future council action, we'll be doing that addendum that I talked about with our consultant to be able to do the phase 1 design for this project as we discussed. We'll be bringing an agreement from MoDOT for the cost share part of this project as well. Hopefully that'll be within the next month or so. And then the only other part we'd be bringing about this project would be any kind of acquisition or right-of-way authorization. We are responsible for that on this, but when we get the project designed, we actually turn it over to MoDOT. They're gonna handle the bidding of the project and the construction and the inspection and all that as well, so that part becomes theirs, so. Any questions about that?
Questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. This is pretty transformative, for sure, for the whole east and western side of Independence. So as we're moving along with the designing phase, is there going to be any type of public engagement? There's plenty of businesses along this first phase of section. I'm sure they're going to be, MoDOT and the design team will limit access going into certain properties and remodifications of parking lot access.
Yeah, there'll definitely be a lot of public engagement in this as well, yes.
Do you know when that timeline might begin to roll out?
I don't know yet. I mean, I think the first thing we've got to do is get this agreement for MoDOT signed, and you know, and then we'll start to put together those kind of schedules. And I would say that I kind of thought of this as kind of the main public rollout for this whole idea. So we hope to be out talking about it in the public quite a bit from this point forward. So.
I don't want to speak for Councilman Doherty, but I think you may be in agreement that as we get things set, and I mean, this is important enough for this first phase that we get with the property owners there,
Right.
the businesses, and the residents that do live along that section, to let them know what we're doing and get
Right.
their input. That's
Definitely.
highly important. Then as we move on to the second phase, is there any way that we can enhance our probability of winning the extra funding to move that if we were to do a joint municipal approach with City of Independence, Sugar Creek, the county if possible, if there's anything there that can help improve our odds to make sure we have that funding?
Sure, I think so. I mean, that's one of the funding options we were going to look at is another STP grant. And anytime you can do a multi-jurisdictional application, it scores a lot better than just a single one, so yes.
Because right now we say second phase, but there may never be a second phase. So this is where we really need to buckle
Right.
down and make sure that there is a second phase
Right.
to get that, because that is really the heart of where I would like to go as we move west
Right.
towards Kansas City, because I have the 24 highway business plan right here, and there was a lot of work that was already done, and MoDOT was in all those meetings to where when we do, if you're following along at home on page 48 on the side street network, and I mean, we have all these different options for the heart of Fairmont for street relocations and alignments that can change the whole dynamic there. So as that gets moving along, we really need to do our diligence because there's going to be some significant land acquisitions there, so
Right.
to really plan this out.
Right.
So we have a phase 1 and 2. I'm going to throw out a phase 3. So what is there a possibility, and I'm throwing the long ball here like the Chiefs, to get something from Wilson Road to 435 and have that whole section enhanced, cleaned up, and this wouldn't take a multiple jurisdiction between us and Kansas City agreement to try to do something, MoDOT, to try to enhance that area there, because as people get off 435, as you know, people think that's Independence, and that is not Independence. We do not get into Independence until you get to about the next level lawn care service. Everything west is Kansas City. So is there any thoughts? What's the potential of that maybe? Do you have a crystal ball that can give me some clarity?
Probably a little fuzzier on that one, especially since it involved Kansas City.
Sure.
But, you know, it was something we can talk to them about. I mean, we can always be a partner with them, you know, in the application process. You know, but it's something we haven't actually talked about yet.
I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to get the second phase locked down, but if we're doing that, we might as well
Right.
go ahead and extend that.
Right. And the thing that's important about the second phase of this project is MoDOT's already identified they have some specific safety money available for that. West of Wilson, they probably won't have any specific funding already identified, so more of it may fall on us to do that. But, I mean, like, again, I mean, if we can get Kansas City to go along with some of that, that could help alleviate some of that.
Well, it's only worth
Yeah.
a shot for sure. I mean, this is transformative enough that we might as well, if we're going to do it, we might as well do it
Right.
all the way.
Sure.
We're known for being pretty vocal at these Mark meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Especially-
definitely come, you know, to fight for our fair share.
So where does 40 Highway stand on accidents? Any way we can get this going over there, because we're going to get this other thing in the hopper too, right?
Yeah, well, we're actually working on a complete streets project for 40 right now, and it's about 80, close to 80% designed, I think. So you're probably going to see that happen. I think the money for that was 2020 as well, so maybe next year there'll be some improvements made on that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, finally this evening, we have our boards and commissions report. Madam City Clerk.
We have a few boards and commissions that we're looking for direction to add resolutions to the next regular meeting. The Human Relations Commission, we're looking to add a resolution to reappoint Tia Tulua and to appoint Lupe Moy. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, you can add that resolution to the next meeting.
Next is Board of Ethics. We're looking to add a resolution to appoint Rebecca Miles to the board. If there's no objection, we'll add a resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, you can add that one to the next meeting.
Next, we're looking to add a resolution to appoint Joe Weir and Rick Dreyer to the Planning Commission. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, you can add that to the next meeting.
Next, we're looking to reappoint Lori Dean Wiley to the Independence Economic Development and Incentive Commission. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, please add that to the next meeting.
Next, we're looking to add a resolution to appoint Grace Cormindy to the TIF Commission. If there's no objections, we'll add the resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, you can add that one.
Next, we're looking to add a resolution for the Brand Independence Committee to appoint Quentin Templeton and Bryce Young. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, please add that.
And finally, we're looking to add a resolution to reappoint Jonathan Zur to the Industrial Development Authority. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution.
Okay, are there any objections? Okay, hearing none, you can add that one to the next meeting.
Thank you.
I know it's been a long night already. We did talk previously, as I've been looking at some of our vacancies, these alternates to the Board of Building and Engineering Appeals. We have a hard enough time getting these boards and commissions filled to the point where they have a quorum. Alternates are rarely or ever needed. These have been expired, one since 2015, one since 2016. I would like for this council to consider removing the requirement that we have alternates for these, for the Board of Building and Engineering Appeals. It's very difficult to ask a citizen to volunteer for a commission when they are likely never to be called upon. I know it's something we've discussed previously. Becky, maybe you could provide the council with a memo and your recommendations on cleaning up some of these alternates on this board and commission and others.
Yeah, I can do that.
There's no objection from the council. Mr. City Manager, anything else this evening?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
We are adjourned.